You guys don't know Break the Rules. We bring in people from completely different political circles and other kinds of circles in order to break a lot of these thought bubbles that have formed over time. And today we're going to be talking about the incident, the scandal with Tenet Media being connected to Russian money as far as influencing these various content creators like Tim Pool and others. And Dylan, I know that you have been very much involved on the pro-Ukraine side of this current culture war we're in right now. Andrew, I would say the complete opposite. You are 100% Maga for life. Not a big fan of Ukraine, but specifically for this stream, I would want to focus on what exactly is happening here and what it means in the grander scheme of things for all content creators. So, Dylan, I was wondering if you could please break it down for the people, like in short, what exactly has transpired so far. And if you guys are just tuning in again, be sure to smash that subscribe button. Patreon.com/breaktherules to become a patron, support the show. We got a lot of really interesting people coming in here. Anyway, Dylan, go ahead, brother.
Sure, I'll try to remove any emotive opinion from it and just describe the bare bones as they are. So in 2020, the United States banned Russia Today from operating in the United States. It was not just in the United States; it was also in the United Kingdom and many other countries, due to the fact that Russia Today was very open about the fact that while they are a media corporation, they serve the interests of the Russian government. This has been openly stated by the CEO before, and therefore they proliferate information that is favorable to it. And so the West thought, well, considering the circumstances, we do not want to allow them to proliferate propaganda in the West, considering some of it might be, for example, even around health risk issues where they attack certain health issues that are important, et cetera. So the West made the decision that they were going to not allow Russia Today and other Russian government outlets to operate in the West. What Russia decided to do was, instead of tapping out and going home, is they wanted to make their information warfare operation underground and covert. And so what they did is they took millions of dollars and they wanted to go out and form media corporations and social media accounts and whatever they could to try to spread narratives that wouldn't even necessarily be like I love Russia. Russia is the best. I wish Vladimir Putin was my father. He'd make an amazing dad. No, it can just be as simple as, I think the United States needs to stay at home. I don't think all these issues abroad are that important compared to, for example, veteran homelessness. And so we don't want, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it doesn't need to be like that. It could be anything that really would cause either division in the United States, chaos in the United States, or would serve Russia's interests, as the DOJ indictment pointed towards. And so they end up finding Laura Chen and Donovan, and they end up working with them to create and fund an organization called Tenet Media. From the indictment, it's pretty clear that Donovan and Lauren Chen understood that they were getting money from the Russians. They refer to them in multiple private communications, according to the DOJ indictment, as the Russians. And then they go out and recruit people for this new media corporation in order to promote what the Russians would see as beneficial to their interests, values domestically, whether it be isolationism, foreign policy ends, et cetera. And they offer tremendous amounts of money for small creators. I mean, Benny Johnson was getting $400,000 a month plus $100,000 signing bonus. Tim Pool was getting $100,000 per video, which, I mean, maybe Tim wasn't as good as a negotiator, but I think a lot of it was they were offering whatever was necessary to get them on because they weren't concerned about profitability. They were concerned about getting their message out there and possibly funneling stories to these creators, because Benny Johnson, for example, picked up the Moscow terror attack story. Eventually, this came out with the DOJ indictment, and a lot of these creators are getting in a lot of shit because obviously taking money through intermediaries and shell companies from Russia Today is not a good look if you're trying to look like an unbiased creator. But also, we don't know exactly how much these people knew. The DOJ seems to suggest that a lot of them were unwitting. I think they refer to Content Creator 1 and Content Creator 2, which is supposed to be Dave Rubin and Tim Pool, if you match up the subscriber numbers. And there's only 6 people, so it's not like a hard thing to narrow down. But I don't know about everyone else. Like Lauren Chen and Donovan for sure knew, but it's impossible to say about everyone else. So those are the facts as they lie right now.
So, Andrew, what do you make of this situation? How much responsibility do you think that somebody like Tim Pool has as far as making sure that if there's like this large windfall of money that all of a sudden comes in, that it's well checked out and made sure that it's not coming from these nations like Russia?
Yeah, first of all, I want to say that I know this situation very well, just because 2016, I was the editor-in-chief of We Are Change. Luke Rudkowski had been offered money and a show from Russia Today a significant amount of money, which could have helped the operation a lot. We weren't making a ton of money doing We Are Change, and the money would have really helped. And I told them to take it. I would have taken the Russian money. Okay, you have to understand, alternative media, very, very hard to make a buck. Very, very difficult. Over the years, I finally managed to make some money out of all this. I made the Alex Jones video game, alexjonesgame.com, but it's very hard to make a buck in right-wing media. I told Luke to take the money. You know, props to him. He has so much integrity. He said, I'll never take money from a foreign nation state. I'm always going to be independent. Props to Luke. But I completely understand what Lauren Chen did, because it's very tough to stay afloat when there's not a lot of money for people that are authentic American nationalists and populists. So I don't even care about what Lauren did, let alone what Tim Pool or these other people getting it through an intermediate. I don't care. I don't care. If you want to give me money to say my own views, no problem. Now, if Lauren moderated her views or changed what she said in order to fit with Russia, that there's an issue there for sure. I don't think that's what she did. I think she took money to say what she was going to say anyway. So good for her. Good for her for getting paid when it's very, very hard to make a dollar and say something of real American nationalist interest. So that's my position. Go ahead, brother.
Dylan, any thoughts?
Yeah, I have a slightly different view of the matter. I believe that FARA is good, that we have it, which is, foreign agents that are operating within the United States and are trying to operate for the interests of foreign governments, often against the interests of the United States, have to register. They have to openly register. They need to talk about where they're getting this money from, have a general idea of what they're using this money to do, because we do not want foreign agents operating within the United States. If Lauren Chen, as the indictment suggests, knew that she was getting money from Russian agents and then continued to work with them in an information warfare operation against the United States, I think she should be in front of a judge along with Donovan, because I think that type of behavior is honestly, it's hurtful to the United States. It's hurtful to alt media. It's hurtful to the country. But the thing about alt media I want to stick on for a second, because I think that Russia promoting riots in the United States, or Russia trying to promote discontent and disunity in the United States, it's obvious why that's bad. But for the space generally, we have a problem with credibility in this space, because a lot of us are doing this from our homes, or we're doing it with very small budgets and very small, teams, and we don't have a lot of institutional backing. We're not with MSNBC or CNN, where most of us are streamers, bloggers, or something of that sort. And a lot of the pitch or the sell of being an alt media was, we are against the establishment. We are not going to necessarily engage in the type of lying and deceit and lack of coverage on the real issues that the mainstream media is, because we're not biased. We don't take the money from the big advertisers, from the defense companies. We don't take the money from the people trying to manipulate our storytelling and our news telling to make a buck out of you. We care about the viewer first. And I think that there's going to be a reputational hit if the people who are supposed to be doing that in the alt media sphere aren't doing any basic digging into where they're getting hundreds of thousands of dollars. If somebody comes up to you and offers you hundreds of thousands of dollars in an endeavor that was never going to be profitable, that Lauren Chen and Donovan said in the communications they knew was never going to be a profitable endeavor, then I think you should be suspicious. And it's kind of weird that nobody asks questions.
Andrew, your thoughts on that? Andrew, are you there? Keep in mind, everybody, Andrew is driving a car right now, and Bog Beef should be joining us as well, just to also make sure that there is somebody who is also from the right who may push back a little bit, although I don't think that Bog Beef is as much on the side of, let's say, Lauren Chen as Andrew. But Andrew, you got the floor, buddy. Andrew, are you there? See, this is what happens when people drive in cars. Uh-oh, there we go. Anyway, Dylan.
Can I say one more thing?
Yes, go on.
Can you hear me?
Oh, okay, here we go.
You can hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So as to the criticism, first of all, I don't trust our Justice Department at all. We've seen all of the lies and nonsense they throw at Donald Trump. We're willing to throw any, try and stick to yours. I put any stop in at all. This is America. You're innocent until proven.
Andrew, you have a really bad internet connection. I can barely hear you. Maybe it's better right now. Talk. Yeah,
Uh,
it's not really working out that well.
Hello?
Hello, Andrew. Get somewhere, please. Drive somewhere, park somewhere where you have a better connection. But Dylan, you had a point. Let us know.
Yeah, I just also want to put out there that, like, if putting aside the morality of taking money from foreign agents that are actively trying to destabilize American elections or the United States, which, I would like us to not riot, and the Russians would spend money to fund Black Lives Matter protests or try to organize Black Lives Matter protests, organize counter protests, and then have them fight each other. That's what the Internet Research Agency was all about. And so if you're working with those same people and taking their money, they don't have the best interests of American nationalists, what's great for America. What they have the best interest of is Moscow, of the Kremlin. That's why all these people would immediately be dropped by the Russians, because they see people who work with them, Americans who work with them, as people who are unloyal, not people to be trusted in the first place. That's why a lot of them end up getting burnt. But when it comes to Lauren Chen, if she had a suspicion that they were the Russians and she refers to them as the Russians, in the indictment it says that she actually messages the people, like the Hungarian businessman that's supposed to, message the people that are being managed by the Hungarian businessman that was not real. And when they don't respond, she Googles what time it is in Moscow. And that's on top of her constantly referring to them as the Russians.
Yeah.
It's like so if she knows this and then doesn't tell Tim, doesn't tell Lauren Southern, doesn't tell any of these creators, including small creators like Tyler and others who are not nearly as big as these behemoths that are going to survive no matter what. And they recruit them in this idea, hey, you're going to get money, you're going to get this new platform. And the deal seems almost too good to be true from this Hungarian businessman that has no record, but don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. And you could even see her kind of like rushing them along it, saying, we'll get to know each other once we're in the business together. Don't worry, sign the contract. That, to me, would be really bad on her part if she considers herself friends with any of these people, because now she's sunk them down with her.
But if you were in the shoes of Tim Pool, let's say, what exactly is the situation with seeing all of this money come in and just trusting this strange, anonymous Hungarian businessman and not doing
his
any...
name's spelled wrong, mind you. His name is spelled wrong multiple times.
Interesting. Andrew, are you
Can
there?
you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Can you? Okay. First, to the criminality, I don't know if you heard any of my point earlier, but I don't trust our Justice Department at all. So any indictment that they want to throw, they tried to stick Donald Trump with all sorts of nonsense. So I'm not going to take any indictment they're throwing at right-wing political figures at all, on its face at all, innocent until proven guilty, and I don't buy what they're selling. That's first of all, as to the supposed criminality. A second, as to, she's impugning the credibility of the space. Listen, if you want to offer me money to say what I'm going to say anyway, no problem with that at all. And the left-wing media is not so clean. Oh, there's no foreign actors in left-wing media. Please, Hollywood is in business with China these days. You can't make a movie that's a big-budget movie without China saying you have to take this out of the film.
I'm sure, by the way, that Russia's influencing the far left as well, 100%.
Yeah, Russia, it was shown in the 2016 election, the run-up to that. They were sowing chaos on both sides. Michael Moore even attended or promoted some rally that was actually set up by a Russia Facebook account.
Oh yeah, you get like Jill Stein, you got people like that, so of course.
Yeah, Jill Stein.
Yeah, but in terms of what's going on right now, though, Dylan, what do you think? Like, is Andrew potentially right? Maybe this could be all some kind of a op, or is there enough evidence here to say, like, 100% this is what's going on?
If half of what is in that DOJ indictment, unless they literally made everything up, and there really was Czech auto parts companies and funding millions of dollars through their Czech auto parts sale, through selling like carburetors and like wheels and shit. They're able to make like millions upon millions of dollars to then funnel to a businessman who's not real, who then funnels it to a company in Tenet. Like, maybe we all find out that that's actually all true and Czech businessmen actually love Lauren Southern and that, they've been very big fans of Temple. It's possible that all this has ended up, but I don't think it's likely. If half of what's in this is true, then I think it's a problem. I think it's an issue. As for the DOJ, like, we can like lampoon the credibility of the DOJ, but the DOJ puts out indictments year after year after year after year, and the vast majority of them do not come out with stuff like this, and then it's followed up with, well, I guess there's nothing there. I guess we're going to follow this up with nothing. There's no evidence. There was nothing to back up any of the words. It was all made up. So I don't think that this was just written up. with no evidence whatsoever is part of the reason why the content creators are involved in treating it seriously. Tim Pool's treating it seriously. Benny Johnson's treating it seriously. Everybody's treating it seriously. And the biggest issue for me, again, a lot of this doesn't even have to be with content creators taking money from bigger organizations. I don't have a problem with that. It has to do with knowing who you're taking money from, which I think is a basic requirement if you want your audience to trust you. You don't want to just find out that your favorite content creators that have been informing you about foreign policy issues is taking large sums of money from one of the countries involved in said foreign policy issue. That's something that would cause suspicion with anyone. Just like if we found out that fucking Kamala Harris took $20 million from the Chinese, we would question whether or not she would be well to run the country of China. We heard so much complaints about Hunter Biden. The Hunter Biden money in Burisma doesn't even come close to the $10 million that was funneled from these shell companies over into the United States. And this is not a necessarily right-wing, left-wing issue. The right wing has been more sympathetic to anti-Ukrainian stuff, even though that's not the only focus of this at all. But left-wingers have a problem with it too. We were just talking about Jill Stein, so I don't think this is a right-wing centered issue, even though the right has been where most of the scattershot has hit. There's a problem on the left as well. Like Jill Stein is an example of this.
Well,
that's a hilarious example for him to bring up Burisma himself and then say, oh, but it's not that much money. Please, first of all,
how much money was in Burisma?
First of all, Ukraine as a whole, the whole thing is money laundering. They're sending all these billion. Hey, I didn't interrupt you at all. I'll mute your mic when I'm talking, son. The whole thing with Ukraine. Oh no, okay, I'll interrupt you then. It'll be terrible for both of us.
Why did
Don't be an idiot.
Mic? You just say,
all right, I'm gonna interrupt you when it's your turn next. No problem. Now I know the rules. All right, get a haircut. The point being, when Ukraine gets all this money from Congress for nothing, it all gets filtered back to Nancy Pelosi. All these people, they're all in league with the media, by the way. Dana Bash at CNN just did the only interview that Kamala Harris has given so far. She's married to one of the 51 intelligence agents that condemned Donald Trump. All that nonsense. These people are all taking money. They're all getting paid from the American deep state. They're getting kickbacks from these deals on arms to Ukraine. It's a very nasty business. Oh no, Russia gave some money to Lauren Chen. I don't care. So if you want to say that, oh, they broke the law. They had their toe over the line. They should have registered with FARA. I don't care. If they are actually guilty by the letter of the law, then President Trump, give them a pardon. I really don't care. Information warfare. Lauren Chen and anybody on the right that's pushing against the commies, the evil, the filth that's trying to erode this nation, give them all the money. I don't care who wants to give me money to say that America needs to stand up and be righteous. I don't care where the money comes from. I didn't see her messaging change to the point where she's saying Russia, Russia, Russia. I didn't see anything like that, where she's advocating for us to give weapons to Russia like we're giving to Ukraine, give money to Russia like we're giving to Ukraine. So
I just want to say we're going to bring Bog Beef in here as well, but I just want to say that it's not something that I think is that good to only see one side as being right and the other side as being wrong. And I think, like Andrew, as much as I appreciate your cowboy hat, you do have, as well as people within the Maga circle, a tendency to see the enemy of your enemy as your friend. And, being kind of like a leaf that's being blown on the winds of contrarianism. But anyway, Dylan, you got the floor, buddy, and then I'm going to bring in Bog Beef.
Sure. Yeah, the money laundering stuff is just completely made up. It's mostly just for schizophrenics on the internet. If you buy into it, you're probably one of them. As for taking money from foreign actors, I do not think...
You don't think that they're taking money? Nancy Pelosi's not getting any money? Nancy Pelosi's not getting money from the Ukraine deal?
No, she isn't. Prove it.
Oh my God, you're a tool.
Prove it,
total tool.
You're literally...
Total tool.
You're
a tool. You're a total tool. Total tool.
All right, one at a time.
Prove Nancy Pelosi.
One at a time. Okay, one at a time. Now I'm going to be throwing the hammer down, and we definitely have to give...
Now it's one at a time. Yeah.
Yeah, one at a time, yeah, because you guys are shouting too much. I think there's enough chaos. I wanted a little bit of an infusion of chaos to wake me up, but now I think it's time to go one at a time. So Dylan, then Andrew, and then I want to bring in Bog Beef. So Dylan,
so we didn't get through the first point, because there was other things, like taking money from foreign actors is okay, and like weapons and stuff like that. So let me get through the first point first. The way corruption works in Ukraine is not in the cartoonish, like we send over tank, they grab tank, and then they sell it to the cartels, the way Vivek Ramaswamy and all these other loons think it is. The way corruption works in Ukraine is usually there's a guy in a government position who wants to give a contract to one of his buddies who makes a shell company, who then gets the contract, does a poor job on contracting, bad job repairing roads, bad job of doing something along those lines, and then they get the money that was supposed to go into fixing the community. That's like a typical Ukrainian corruption scheme. There's other types of corruption schemes when it comes to draft dodging and stuff like that, but the way people talk about it, like that America had these bags of gold doubloons and we brought it across the Atlantic Ocean, gave it to Zelensky, he took half of them, then put them in the Clinton Foundation yacht before being driven back across the United States and handed over to Nancy Pelosi. That's just not happening. And if it did happen, there'd be a trace of it. But there's no trace of it. So instead, we're here talking about imaginary money, imaginary Hungarian businessmen, and imaginary fake American companies that are actually run by the Russians.
Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, it's just laughable, the guy talking about that there's no money laundering after all the billions we're giving to Ukraine. It's just laughable. I don't think anybody is taking him seriously at this point. So on to the next.
No. Do you have any receipts for the things that Dylan was talking about? If you think that they do exist, where could we find them? What should we look up? You know, like people have the internet today. We can do this kind of stuff.
Sure, look up Pelosi's son. Look up his ties to Ukraine, where he's getting the money out of Ukraine. Look up Pelosi's son right now.
Okay. Dylan,
Okay, look up his son. Lev, can you please look up his son so we can go through the details?
Absolutely.
I mean, if I'm happy going down a rabbit hole because I've done this plenty of times. I've traveled these rabbit holes. But as to the other thing, why it's okay to take money from foreign actors, to be clear, their plan is not to help build an authentic right-wing movement. And people are not going to buy into an authentic right-wing movement if people look at it and they think, oh, it's all funneled by the Chinese, by the Russians, by the Iranians, and everybody that wants to see America fall and burn and all of us to go shoot each other's neighbors because we have so much political division. So they don't see us on the world stage. Now, you might have like some agreement there about isolationism, but their goal for these people in that plan is not to build a future conservative America that's prosperous for the people. The goal of the plan is to destabilize an American election, to keep America destabilized so it cannot interact on the world stage. And if America is destabilized, I don't consider working with someone to destabilize the United States, even if it's by accident, even if you stumble into it, even if you just get caught up into a plan, you shouldn't be involved in those types of plans. And when you get recruited by people for large sums of money by strange foreign men, you should ask where the money comes from. I don't think that's such a crazy standard to hold to the people who we are saying is better than the mainstream media who takes the defense contract money. And you say, screw it, take the Russian money, take the Chinese money, take the Iranian money, take the cartel money, take the money from the criminals, from the gangs, from everybody. As long as they're with you, anyone can be your ally. I reject that.
The first thing
also, you're naive on the weapons issue.
Yeah, the first thing, not at all. The first thing I said when I turned on my mic in this whole deal was to praise Luke Rudkowski of We Are Change for doing it the right way, for going the toughest road, not taking money from anybody, any foreign actors, any massive infusion from anybody except real, authentic listeners in America. He did the exact right thing. All I'm saying is I don't condemn Lauren Chen. That what she did is, in my opinion, not morally wrong. However, if she stumbled into an op that makes people discredit the right-wing movement, that is where it's not great.
Andrew, quick question, Andrew. If you were in Lauren Chen's shoes, wouldn't you tell Tim Pool, like, hey, this guy is actually, Russian, that I'm working with the Russians? Wouldn't that be something that you would tell somebody like that, just so everybody's on the same page?
I would not deceive people as to the source of foreign funds. But we don't know that she did that, and that's the other thing.
If we assume she did that, just for a second, Andrew, if we do assume that she did that, would that not be pretty despicable on her part to let all these people down like that?
No, for sure, deceiving people is wrong. And if she deceived people, that's the worst thing that she did. However, I don't look at her as some evil criminal, and we don't know what she did. We haven't heard from her at all.
Now, I want to bring in Bog Beef into this. Let's see if we could have a third position type of deal going on with Bog over here. You are also for more of a right wing, but not necessarily super ultra MAGA. You have the Good Old Boys podcast that you do, and I think you do support Trump as well, but I wouldn't say you're as within the whole cause as Andrew is, but I am kind of curious. What you think about all this? Your audio is not on, my friend. You have to turn your audio on, go into the settings because they do not hear you.
I'm sorry.
No problem. There we go.
apologize, Lev. I just assumed that this was tomorrow, the next day, or whatever. But anyways, so yeah, so my stance, and I don't want to get too much into it, but I mean, I don't want to overrun these gentlemen's. Sound like they have a nice
A
good
lover's
rate.
quarrel, if you will.
Yeah, good radio here. You know, they say in real radio, whenever the people are fighting, that you know, the producers in the background's like, heat it up, heat it up, heat it up. You know what I mean? Get them going. I'm sure Lev is you know, fanning the flames here. But I mean, my stance is how it is for literally. I mean, I'd feel the same way if this was foreign aid. If they were showing us pictures of starving people in Eastern Europe or whatever. I think if you look at history, at how these things play out, especially the patronage math, when you start doing weird things to other places, when the leadership becomes like, okay, well, I'm the guy that brings in the millions and millions of dollars from the big country over there. Now, I understand this is a different situation than foreign aid. This isn't giving money to Rwanda or whatever like that. There's this war, and you know, I believe this is sold to America as conservative. This is probably sold different ways to different people, but as a conservative, they're telling us they tell us a couple things. One of the things I just want to be straight up front with about this conflict is that I do feel intense jealousy. It annoys me that when Ukraine is allowed to have this sort of robust nationalism, and we're not. That upsets me. I don't like that, and that's just like I don't know. There's no one to address that to. You know, that's just it's just a fact of life. We see this also with Israel. But just to stick with, I could talk about the patriot stuff, but I just want to go back to the what everyone wants to talk about, which is the Lauren Chen and
Tim Pool and all those guys, the Tenet Media scandal.
Tenet Media,
yeah. I mean, so the Department of Justice executing this, that always makes me roll my eyes. I mean, I don't really like the Department of Justice. Even people can look up where the Department of Justice comes from. As a Southerner, I rebuke its existence to begin with. But okay, I would love to know. It's interesting when this comes up. Like, there are rules for this, because I mean, look what Al Jazeera does in this country. It's insane what they do. They have like I can't think of the name. I tried to look it up. They have that little outlet that's called like
AJ
Now
Plus.
Yeah, but they have a separate one. It's called like Now This or something like that. That has these little short, really punchy left-wing clips. Like the main host is this woman with an Italian name, and it's really top. It's not for me, but it's top tier propaganda. And they all use American hosts. And like, it is the reason why that's totally fine, and this is wrong that we're at war with Russia, because are we at war? Is it just because of their?
Is that a general question, or is that directed towards?
I could actually answer that one a little bit from what I know, since the Biden administration, at least elements of it, have been awfully friendly towards the Iranian regime in comparison to the Trump administration. You know, we could look at ties that various people may have there, but there has been like this balancing act that Biden's administration and now Kamala's trying to have between like Israel and Palestine and all of that stuff. But what's interesting to me is that Iran is a really big friend of China, as well as a really big friend of Russia, and this media company you're talking about is also very friendly with Iran. So we're talking about like the left wing being aligned with the elements who are catering to the right wing when it comes to like channels like this. Like, they're not focused on the right, they're focused on the left, but we do end up having the same kind of problems, which people on the left, I think, Dylan, I'm not sure, they would ignore. They wouldn't look at him as much. And the people on the right, because they say like, oh, this person, you know, likes a lot of these lefty things, then I'm going to be against Ukraine. I think it ultimately comes down to total tribal contrarianism. And that's why we can't solve a lot of these problems, because one side is always going to be against the other. So I don't know. That's my take. Dylan, what do you think?
You know, I'm not. I wanted to respond to the Al Jazeera Tenet thing because around Al Jazeera, because I have a problem of the idea of governments like funding foreign media operations to begin with, but it happens. It's been happening for a very, very long time. So if it's going to be happening, the least that I would want is to know that the person speaking to me has those Qatari or Gulf dollars in his back pocket. It would make me better understand how I should approach that media. From what bias is this coming from? Who's paying this person to say what? That level of transparency is what I care about. Maybe it's because it's a very American viewpoint of the consumer. Like the consumer must know what his, but whatever it is, that matters a lot to me. And for me, not registering as a foreign agent while funneling money to try to get people to lie for you and or to promote narratives that are in line with your narratives that are within your state interest could not only end up leading people guiding towards goals that are not their own if you're being caught up in something like this, even though people might laugh at the idea of like getting all this money and being a victim when the creators involved in this are describing themselves as victims of this scheme, they are technically deceived. And so they are technically victims too, even if they're a victim also of their own, when you see big dollar signs, a lot of the other signs start to like dimmer down and you pay less attention when something's a little too good to be true. But the Al Jazeera comparison, I think the main thing is transparency. As to the thing we talked about earlier about if deceiving, I earlier heard from Andrew that deceiving people is wrong. And I'm happy we have like a groundwork to build up from, is that lying is bad and deceiving people is wrong. And so when we talk about Tenet Media, they wanted these creators to lie for them. When you read the communications from the DOJ indictment, it's pretty clear that they were having internal discussions about how to get these creators to engage in more either anti-Ukraine, anti-aid content, more isolationist or content that was to Russia's ends. And they were discussing how to do it without being too on the nose. And one instance that they highlight in the indictment is them approaching and them saying maybe it's too on the nose to go to them about the big terror attack in Moscow that killed all those people at the mall was absolutely horrific, and Daesh, ISIS did it. What if we try to get them to say that was Ukraine, or try to connect it to Ukraine in some way? And then they were like, I don't know, it might be a little too on the nose. But they brought it to Content Creator 3, which is now known to be Benny Johnson, and he went with it anyway. And so it's not just a question of, oh, they're getting money just to help creators that they think is cool. I think that would be a naive way to look at it, even though I don't think anybody in here said that. I do think they also want them to lie for them and push narratives that favored them and build up a platform where they could do that, Tenet Media.
Andrew, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I saw from all the reporting on this, there's not many examples of people changing their reporting. Like Lauren Chen would be naturally anti-Ukraine anyway, as I am. I have no interest in pushing NATO right to the front door of Russia. It's wrong. Zelensky is wrong. And I'm not some Putin fanboy. I agree that he's trying to sow chaos in the United States. I think he probably wants Kamala to win. That's part of what they're doing here. Is like it's an obvious influence operation that is now being used against the right. So I don't like any parts of this, but I'm looking at it from, okay, Lauren Chen's name is being dragged, thrown under the bus by all these people on the right, and she did what everybody on the left is doing all the time, which is taking money from bad actors to produce media. And Lauren, as far as I can tell, didn't change what she had to say that much. Our man, the macho man, Randy Savage in here had it exactly right. Al Jazeera funds all kinds of stuff. Qatar, if you want to watch the documentary Blood Money by John Dutoit and Scooter Downey, Qatar is funding all kinds of people on the left, rhinos on the right. Qatar is in the U.S. media. If you wanted to drop this type of accusation against basically anybody from the left to the rhino right, you could find these charges and drop them on anybody. So if you want to make Lauren Chen special, it's just nonsense. This type of charge can be dropped on anybody. This is politically motivated. And to make her some kind of pariah over something that is happening every day all over the left, especially in the rhino right, too, it's just crazy. Lauren Chen did nothing wrong, except maybe, we don't know, not tell some of the people where some of the money's coming from. And I don't even buy that all the way. I don't trust the Justice Department. Exactly what I said up front, and exactly what the macho man Randy Savage had to say when he came in.
Dylan.
Yeah, I've never been paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to say that terror attacks were actually done by countries they weren't. I've never been paid to do that. I don't know.
You don't know
anybody
who did the terror
personally.
attack. You don't
Wait,
know who
hold
did that
on,
terror
Andrew,
attack.
It
don't
was
interrupt.
ISIS. What do you mean I don't know who did it? It had all the signs of ISIS. It was done like ISIS. ISIS claimed it. ISIS
False
has a
flags
big
never
conflict with
happened. Yeah,
Russia.
false flags never happened.
Well, everything's going to be a false flag, though. If
No,
you don't have any evidence,
and-
the other
but you don't
evidence
know.
is Ukraine.
You don't
What
know.
Evidence, all the evidence points towards it being ISIS. ISIS claimed it. Russia has a long conflict with ISIS. That went
ISIS
into Syria
is
because they all
ISIS.
don't like ISIS.
ISIS takes money. ISIS takes money and weaponry from the American deep state. That's fact. New York Times reporting. Ukraine is also part of this whole conglomerate. You don't know who did what, and they're all aligned.
Andrew, hold
So-
on. Let's
I know
take.
what you're talking about because I know
Yeah.
I know some of the people who worked on the report. What the report is about America
Don't
trying
stutter,
to give
son.
weapons to Syrian rebels that were against Assad, and then the rebels fight with everyone. And as happened in the fucking crazy Syrian civil war, those weapons kept trading hands until they ended up in the hands of ISIS or airdrops that went wrong. We don't have any evidence that there was a deep state.
The United States directly gave aid to ISIS under
Can
Obama.
we check on that other thing you said earlier about Nancy Pelosi's son? Can we check on that?
declassified,
Yeah, okay,
and you don't know what you're talking about.
Andrew, hold on. Okay, so here's the thing. If we take a step back and just look at the report, Andrew, please, for the love of God, or GD as you like to say, I guess, can you go into the mindset that this is a real report, that it's not fabricated? And if you're in that mindset, in that report, Dylan, do they not say that we are going to, attempt to sell this to, this commentator, but it may be a little bit too on the nose? If somebody says something like that, if somebody is conversing with somebody else about trying to push a certain agenda, but then thinking, no, this is too much, wouldn't that already indicate that it's not true?
My answer is yes, but I think that was directed towards Andrew.
Yeah, Andrew, any thoughts on that?
You need to look up Operation, I believe it's called Timber Sycamore. Look
Okay,
that one
Timber
up right
Sycamore,
now.
Pocahontas,
he already
whatever.
knows.
You tell me
He
about
already
it. I never heard
knows.
about it. Of
He
course I did.
already
My grandpa
knows.
did it.
No, but
Of course.
Andrew,
I'm
this is
family
this is
tradition.
bad.
CIA,
Got him.
Prince household.
Got him.
Andrew,
there you go.
Andrew,
He
you could
already
be
knew.
you could be the
There he
rightest.
goes.
Why is that weird that I know Timber
Are you
Sycamore?
being paid? What country's paying you, son?
Hold on. Andrew, listen. I want to make sure we stick on topic here. We can talk about, Sycamore and the trees and Pocahontas and whatever a little bit later. But right now I was asking a very, very specific question.
No, Operation Timber Sycamore. It's talking about the U.S. giving
What is this?
arms to
Andrew,
ISIS.
Andrew,
That's
okay,
what it is.
we can take a look at all of that later.
Timber Sycamore did not have to do with giving guns to ISIS. It had to do with giving guns to Syrian rebels, and in the funneling of those guns to an active war zone,
To
where villages
ISIS.
are falling into different hands
To
all the time.
ISIS.
Some of those weapons ended up in the hands of ISIS, but the vast majority of those weapons ended up in the hands of other Syrian rebel groups because that's where they were
Total
destined.
cope. Total cope.
Okay.
He already knew what it was.
Andrew,
I want to
but-
know who's funding this
Lev,
guy.
Can we
Andrew,
sit down and read
it's
the New York-
bad-
we can read the New York Times report.
Yeah, we can do all that, but
do it.
again,
We can go
it's
through it, and we'll see if they say yes. They said we want to give the gun to ISIS because we love the chaos.
okay. But Andrew, again,
We want to
it's
stabilize Iraq, the government we were propping up. It doesn't make any sense.
I just want to know: are you getting paid as much? You're not getting paid as
No.
much as Lauren Chen.
okay. Hold on, Andrew. I keep having to mute you because I want to make sure we're sticking on topic here. It is bad form to, when I'm asking a certain question, talk about a completely other thing and do all this. Well, what about this? What about that?
No, it's not. He was talking about the terrorist attack. He said he knows for sure who it was.
Okay, but
I'm
then you
talking
can talk
all of
about
the
that
elements running
later.
ISIS, and he knows what I'm talking.
Andrew,
Can you
I
give
asked
any
you a
evidence that it
specific.
might not have been ISIS.
Oh boy, hold on, Dylan. I want to get to the specific thing I was talking about, and not this right now. This we could talk about a little bit
Drag
later.
this down the rabbit hole. I wasn't going to just let him say
Yeah.
it and then not respond.
No, that's
He was like,
fine. That's fine. But
crazy
again,
theories on
Andrew,
ISIS.
we could talk about this later. I'm not being censorious. I just want you to answer the question that I was asking you earlier, buddy, which was, if you have these Russians in this Department of Justice document that we're talking about, well, this might be a little bit too on the nose to, talk about this ISIS connection. It's too obvious that we're like pushing a narrative here. Would that not, just that alone, would that not be evidence that they're the ones who are lying about this?
Yeah, I'm not going to accept your hypothetical, and you are being censorious by censoring me. And also, this guy knew exactly what I was talking about. And then the lady doth protest too much. He knew exactly where I was going and started crying about it. Oh, it's a rabbit hole. So, listen, all I got to say is you shouldn't have interrupted me. If you wanted this to be nicey, you shouldn't have interrupted me in the first place, because now I got to throw haymakers, and you're going to lose.
What do you mean throw haymakers? What do you mean lose? You just look like a fucking schizophrenic moron. You're saying I'm a CIA agent because you couldn't talk about the timber sycamore operation you brought up because you don't know anything about it.
I didn't call you CIA. I said who's paying you. You're obviously getting some little bit of super chats, probably tiny little bit of super chats, and you sound jealous of Lauren Chen.
I'm not jealous of Russian money. I don't want blood money.
Yeah, you want Ukrainian money.
I don't want Ukrainian money. The Ukrainian government
Yeah, you do.
offered, United States has offered. I don't take it.
No, so
Just
again,
like
I'm
they
gonna
offer more
keep
money
I'm
when
gonna
they go
keep
to
on going back on this hype, because here's the problem, Andrew. The real problem here is that because you don't accept anything at all in this Department of Justice document, if your position is, well, this is fake, what is there to talk about then? Then you can't say anything about the document at all, and that's
that's not true. Listen, I obviously see that there's something going on. Some money changed hands, but as far as their specific allegations, I don't believe them. They are liars. So they got to prove it to me. They got to prove it to me, and I'm going to hear from Lauren Chen. Innocent until proven guilty. I'm not going to throw a right-wing nationalist under the bus on the basis of a Justice Department document when they've been lying for years. I don't believe their lies.
But then how do we do anything in society, Andrew? Then basically what you're saying is that all the Trump people, all the MAGA people, they're always going to be correct, they're never going to lie, and all of the people from the Justice Department, they're going to lie. Okay, then we have a completely dysfunctional society where we can't trust a single thing that goes out there, and sure, like maybe if you go there and you verify it, double, triple verify it, then maybe you're going to find out if those communications are correct. But if we suspend that disbelief just for a second and say that it is true what was going on there, with them trying to push this particular narrative and then saying that, well, this is too much, like they're not really going to fall for it. If you, for a second, just pretend, just role play for a second, believe that that is what happened, then
I don't do role play, brother.
No, I think you do. I think all the people who are in any kind of political organization, any political movement, they're all role-playing because they're all being fed by the algorithm. And Dylan, same thing with you, brother. And I'm sure same thing with me to a certain extent as well. But again...
I wish the algorithm was helping me at all. I'm shadow banned to hell on Twitter. They took me out on Facebook a long time ago.
No, but Andrew,
no algorithm helps me.
If we're going to take a step back and just address the elephant in the room here, it's that we are all more or less dependent on certain algorithmic functions in order to make money. And I really think that this is a huge problem. Like,
hell no, I don't make money from any social media.
But
I wish that I did.
You are part of organizations that do have a particular way of looking at the world, and I honestly think it is reinforced by all of those likes and all those shares and all of that. I'm just saying that as much as we want to think of ourselves as these independent actors who can think rationally about these things, I really don't believe that's the case. I think in our own particular ways, you, Dylan, Bog Beef, we are being reinforced by the algorithm. So when it comes to these Russian people who give these millions of dollars, it's not that they're going to be pushing a particular agenda forcefully down the throat of these content creators. It's that they know that these content creators, because they're going to be contrarian to every single thing that the other side says, are going to be much more favorable for an expansionist Russia, which is then going to be taken over by China anyway. But that the fact that they are going to be so favorable to them means that the only thing that the Russians need to do is just pay them money and let them do their thing. And it's a damn shame. It's a damn shame that so many people have become slaves and some have become prostitutes to this algorithm, to the extent that they're not even going to consider for a second that their worldview may be misinformed, may be mistaken, that there are certain things that they don't take the time to research. Because why? Because let's say, Andrew, what would happen if you, Andrew Meyer, sat down and then found out, not saying it's going to happen, but found out, oh my God, I was wrong about Ukraine. Actually, it's going to be an incredibly horrible thing if Russia keeps expanding. And then what do? I have all these people in my social circle that believe that it's wrong to support Ukraine. How can I live with myself? How can I have this position? I can't. So I think automatically there are these little things inside of our heads that stop us from even considering the fact that we're wrong. And that, I think, brother, is something that we should all work on.
No, first of all, I reject your relativism, the relativist argument that you made. I have perfect objective views of reality. Thank God. God gives me vision. Lev, if you studied the Zohar like I did, you'd have a clearer vision on things. No, Ukraine being beaten down by Russia is not the boogeyman that we should be worried about. I'm not a big Putin fanboy, but I also should think that we should be giving zero aid, $0, 0 cents, zero weaponry to any foreign nation. I have no sympathy for Ukraine that started all kinds of mess with Russia and then got the blowback from it. So Ukraine can eat the stew that they made. It's their problem. I don't want any part of it as an American, not my interest. You're wrong, Lev. You pretend that there's a relativism, but then you actually act as the moral arbiter, but you're wrong. I'm right. Perfect vision from God. Study the Zohar, Zohar.com.
Dylan Burns.
Yeah, you should be friends with people you disagree with. If you're not friends with people you disagree with, or you operate in communities where you're just going to be surrounded by people who agree with you, you're going to be really shocked when you go out and you meet somebody who might not think that, for example, like that ISIS was funded by the CIA. Or, for example, you find somebody that genuinely does not think that Nancy Pelosi is making money off of American Abrams tanks that are being sent over to Ukraine.
All admitted in the New York Times.
No, it isn't.
If you don't mind,
you can't keep saying it. People can go look. I asked people to go read the New York Times article. Just go read it.
Operation Timber Sycamore. Go look it up.
Look it up. It doesn't say to give weapons to ISIS. It says give money to Syrian rebels. You can go to the Syrian rebel groups.
Yeah, what are the Syrian rebels, buddy?
There's a lot of them fought ISIS. What do you mean?
A lot of them were ISIS.
We funded the primary opponent of ISIS, the SDF, the YPG.
We also funded ISIS.
So we decided that we were just going to be like, we're going to make the ISIS kill the Syrian, and then we're going to fund them, and then they're going to go...
Imagine funding two sides of a conflict. That's never happened. Never happened before.
And for what evidence? The New York Times article doesn't even say this. Why am I hypothesizing about an article that doesn't say what you say it says?
Because you know you're wrong. I love the stumbling. I love the cognitive dissonance. I love it.
It doesn't sound like we're making headway on this. If you don't mind, I'd like to step in. As a not neutral observer, I'm an America first, you could say isolationist. I think that term is ridiculous, but more just take that away. Just as someone who's reading the news and trying to figure out what's going on, I have to say this conflict has been very, very frustrating. Now, I don't know how much people like me, just say an average voter, really matter in this story, but let's take a look at. Let's not talk about online personalities, whatever. Let's look at, like, say, Time Magazine, who gave Zelensky Man of the Year in 2022. In November 23, I don't know if you guys read that article, that just like there was this massive, all of a sudden in late 23, the mainstream media just totally snaked on Ukraine. It was all of a sudden very skeptical. Time Magazine, that article, they said he was Man of the year before. They, to quote my friend, portrayed him as incompetent, corrupt, and delusional. There was all these quotes from commanders saying, like, we don't know what's going on. They made Zelensky sound like this lunatic in a bunker, which, look, the point here isn't that one of these is true and one isn't. It's that you just get all you get are these super dramatic flips. Either everything in Ukraine is either like these are superheroes, this Marvel movie, blah blah blah, or you get these people they have no clue what they're doing. They're just blowing money on Rolls Royces.
I got to step in here for a second, real quick. Do you know a guy named Arestovich by any chance? Dylan, you know Arestovich, right?
Yeah, Arestovich. He was Zelensky's advisor. He's an interesting cat.
Yeah, so the thing with Alexei Arestovich, and he was one of the people that was perpetuating during that time Bog Beef that you were just referring to with these articles talking about the dysfunction in Ukraine and all of that. So if you were to go to this Russian interview with Arestovich, that happened about a year before, if not some months before, he was talking about this peace deal that Putin gave to Ukraine, and how, again, in the Maga right-wing circles, there were all these talks about, Ukraine had this peace deal and they didn't want to take it. You could hear Arestovich, again, if you speak Russian like I do, you'd understand what he was saying. You can hear him say how horrible and ridiculous of a peace deal this was, which would have basically required the complete destruction of 90% of Ukraine's military. So it's basically like, we're going to leave you with nothing, and we're going to pinky swear that we're not going to invade you guys. That's the so-called peace deal. And this was the same guy that was consulted around the time you're talking about, Bog. The point that I'm getting to here as well is that most of the people in the media, I believe, are airheads. Mainstream media, or not even mainstream media, regardless. They all follow, whatever algorithm they need to follow. Whether you're working at MSNBC, then you're following not the algorithm, but like what your boss wants you to write. And here on X, on YouTube, you're following a different one. So most people are dumb, most people are airheads, and most people are not going to consider anything other than what's pertinent to consider in the moment. So when this guy got on at that point, they were thinking like, okay, this guy, he worked for Zelensky, he probably knows what he's talking about, and they went with it. They didn't question it. They didn't do any, research into, well, what did this guy say on this Russian channel? What were his views about the peace deal before? Maybe they didn't have anybody who spoke Russian that could have, double-checked this. So my point is that most of these people are going to be extremely flighty, but what I really, really hate, and there's no way of getting rid of this problem, is that, again, most people are going to be contrarian to the other side, regardless of what the other side says, regardless if the other side happens to be right. And Dylan, I think the left is, in many ways, a victim of this as well.
Oh, this is a human problem. This isn't like a the left or right problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
For me, my main problem, and something that Bog Beef said, I think I kind of relate to, which is like, it's either Ukrainian soldiers are like Captain America, or they're Ukrainian soldiers are like the devil incarnate, and they're sacrificing children. And if Ukraine doesn't lose, then all your kids are going to be trans. It's like there's like two wild ends of the spectrum. It's part of the reason why I think there needs to be, and news companies need to invest more in on the ground reporting. It shouldn't just be you just find some local correspondent as the event happens. You should have them in advance. You should have these people on payroll. If you have enough money to give the CEOs of these companies, as much as they do, you have enough money to invest in the journalistic infrastructure to be able to report on places like Sudan, Myanmar, South Sudan, Nepal, wherever it is where a crisis happens, especially if there's been a war going on for 2.5, 3 years, like the war in Ukraine. But when you poll people about where they get their news from about the war, now I haven't seen this polling on the left, and I will just say up front, I have problems with how the left get their information about the war too. It's like a lot of it's like, oh, I was scrolling on TikTok and social, and that's not the best way. But on the right, when I was looking at where people get their news about the war, it was 39% of Republicans get their news about the war from on the ground sources. Over 70% said Trump was like their trusted source of news of the war in Ukraine. And so you shouldn't trust like a politician, period. Zelensky, Biden, Trump to give you news about an ongoing war. You should be trusting like the videos that you can see and that you can prove, the spreadsheets that shows the lost data. You should respect the actual investigations that have been done on the ground by international organizations and the reporting done on the ground by people who put their lives on the line to try to capture these war crimes, because a lot of them get undocumented. For every war crime that gets documented, there's a lot that don't. And so I really do hope that there's more investment into that. But I mean, I'm just wishing well in right now,
Before I came on here, I was like, well, I'll see what's going on in the conflict. And I read one source that told me, well, this Odessa's in play now. Russia, there's no way Russia's going to stop before they're going to take Odessa. This will shut off Ukraine from the water. And this is over. And then I saw another source that said Ukraine is taking more and more territory, and things are going awesome. And I have literally no way to find out. By the way, I just wanted to pop NBC News, November 23. U.S. and European officials began quietly talking to the Ukrainian government about what possible peace negotiation with Russia might entail to end the war. That was November of last year, by the way.
Mm-hmm. For example, right now there's like two really major fronts that everyone's talking about. I don't know if we're going to pull it back to the topic we were discussing before, but I'm comfortable talking about this. There's like the Pokrovsk front, where the Russians are advancing semi-rapidly. It's rapid for the standard of this war, but for any other war, it would still be considered pretty slow. And where there's in the Kursk region, where Ukraine went over the border, where the Ukrainians have advanced and taken much more territory than the Russians have in the last few months, because just they didn't have the defenses. There were not a lot of mines in the ground. And they really surprised the Russians. They really caught them off guard. And since there's two different stories, where on one hand, the story for Ukraine is they've just invaded Russia for the first time since World War II. They're capturing village after village after village. This is horribly humiliating for the Russians. They're capturing a ton of conscriptivist POWs that are 19 years old that you can't ignore because they're not a 44-year-old drunk from the middle of who gives a fuck land that you just threw over there because nobody will care if they disappear. But on the other hand, on Pokrovsk, where I have a lot of my buddies, and I was over there, and I'm going to be releasing an article about that front, that front line is really bad, where the Russians are taking a lot of losses, but they have enough men that they could still continue to advance. And so right now it's a complicated situation. We're waiting for the front to freeze. But when you've got that type of a situation coming out and saying this side is winning, this side is losing, that's what a news company might want, or maybe not even a news company, but that's what people might want, human beings might want, to simplify it when it's not that simple. The strategic situation and tactical situation right now is, in some instances, very good, and in other instances, very worrying. So but that type of nuance is difficult to get across.
Speaking of nuance, there is something that my friend Vladislav Davidson, who was on the stream last week, actually, a great show we had. He's the senior fellow of the Atlantic Council, and he was talking about this scoop he got, where, according to him, the reason why Ukraine decided to go into Kursk was because they saw how airheaded the United States government and Kamala with her finger wagging was towards, the Israelis when it came to what they're doing, and how when they go into Kursk, the United States, will wag their finger but not really do anything. So they're seeing, at least according to Vlad, the United States as being this airheaded, undecisive ditz of a government right now, which has not been giving Ukraine enough weapons to win, because partly they're afraid of, oh my God, what's going to happen if Putin actually loses? So it's this thing that I think many people, including Andrew and Bog Beef, who are on the right, see about our current system, where they see this indecisivity coming from this very short-term thinking about, well, what are the popular girls in the administration going to think? I better protect my reputation. I better not do anything decisive. I better do something that nobody's going to blame me for. And it's kind of funny why we have like somebody like Biden, let's say, in charge, because he's like the zombie that wouldn't really take a lot of this responsibility in a significant way. I think a lot of people see him as just being like this stand-in, this absolute nothing by this point. Thus, a lot of people can get away with making these decisions, that ultimately are not going to help Ukraine, and not take any blame for it. So it's like this weird flightiness. I don't know, Dylan, what you think about that.
Biden has frustrated me quite a lot. When it comes to hesitation to make decisions, and sometimes that hesitation costs months. But it's not, of course, only Biden. Congress, of course, had an impact in things like delay of aid. But I think that while a lot of people will call it ditziness, I've heard people say that America doesn't want Ukraine to win, so technically we're holding them at a certain point just to keep them to survive. That's one thing I hear from people. Another thing I hear from people is that, well, the United States just wants to grind down Russia upon Ukraine. Another is, well, the United States wants to win with Ukraine, but they're still scared because of the Washington consensus of how we do relationship with Russia, of going across certain red lines. It might be a combination of all of these. It's impossible for me to get into the logic of the president or his staff 100%. But what I can say is that I think that Joe Biden has 50, 60 years of experience in foreign policy as a senator. And when you get that long in that type of a position, a lot of times experience breeds caution to an extent that might be good, but it could make you more risk averse. And so I would say, while Biden's risk averseness was tempting to me in comparison to Trump, when I saw the Rocket Man stuff, and I was like, I don't feel super comfortable with how this is going right now. But compared to someone like Kamala or a younger face that might be trying to go out there and almost prove themselves, or somebody who might have a little bit less hesitation, I think maybe they would have taken these decisions on sending jets to Ukraine sooner, maybe would have decided to do the long-range strikes sooner. If Mark Kelly was in there, these approvals, I think, would have already been done, because there's other Democrats who would have approved it. But I think that has to do with Biden's long time in the Senate, making him extremely hesitant, and the general Washington consensus towards Moscow still looming over what was our relationship before that, which was, the reset. We pressed the button. There's still a desire to want to, once this is all over, re-engage with Russia, which I'm, of course, in favor of. But I wonder, because there was one report which has been rejected, that there might be hesitancy because they want to be sure they can rebuild the relationship after. But I've been told by others that might be BS, so who knows?
Well, Bog, yeah.
What I've been wondering the whole time is someone who's my people fought a war against a great power and got beat, and then we did much better in the afterwards guerrilla war. And I think if you look at history, you see that if you're the little guy versus the big guy, you when you do the real war with uniforms and tanks and stuff, that usually doesn't go well. But everything is on your side with the guerrilla war afterwards. And I would just that'd be my advice for you people, you pro-Ukrainian side, is that
I disagree so much with you though, man. I'm sorry, but I'll let you finish.
But I mean, it's so much easier to fight a guerrilla war than to fight a real war if you're the little guy. That's just my little hopefully something make the Ukrainians feel better.
If I can get in for 2 seconds, I just want to ask Lev, who has implied several times something catastrophic will happen if Putin is allowed to do what he wants. Please give me the long-term ramifications of not arming and funding Ukraine, Lev.
Absolutely, I shall. I think most of these NATO agreements that we have are not worth the paper they're written on, much like we saw during World War II. And I know there's been all this recent talk about Winston Churchill and all of that. And again, I'm not going to be going into those rabbit holes at this moment. But suffice it to say, I don't trust a lot of these agreements when we're talking about NATO, and it's like, oh my God, what, why would Russia ever even risk of going into a NATO country when there's going to be this war? I personally believe that Russia sees America and Europe and the West in general as weak. I think that Russia isn't scared of them. I think the only thing that Russia fears is China. And that is the primary motivator of why they're acting the way they're acting, and I think they're going to keep going until they're stopped. And judging by a lot of the attitudes of today's politicians, which again goes back to the same quality of always wanting to play it safe, that I really imagine, give it a few years, if let's say Ukraine loses, God forbid, then Russia's going to rest up, get more money from China, and is going to keep going. China pretty much owns Russia now. So Andrew, again, this stupid-ass dialectic that we have where people on the right see China as the bad guy and Russia maybe not as a good guy, but they look like us. We can get along with them. We can make a good deal with them. You guys know absolutely shit about Russia.
Tell me where Russia's going next after Ukraine. You said they're going to keep going.
Yeah.
Tell me where they're going on the risk board, Lev.
Poland, Baltics. Dylan, go on. You have some thoughts on this as well.
I disagree.
But they're going into Poland. Russia's going into Poland. Is that right? Is that what I just heard?
Yeah.
Russia's going into Poland, Lev?
Once they rest up, once they get enough money, I definitely think there's a possibility that, again, this whole thing, to me, it's not just about Ukraine.
I'm happy he's having fun.
Yeah, Dylan, you disagree with me, though.
That's hilarious.
Lev, I do disagree. I think it'd probably be Moldova. They already have troops illegally stationed there.
Sure. Okay, no, as far as what's first,
it's
sure.
not protected by NATO 5, Article 5. But the problem with Moldova that people don't realize is Romania, a NATO country, is under no situation going to just allow something like that, like with no problems. And there is a scenario where the Romanians think, well, if they just barrel through Ukraine, and now they're burying through territory which we recognize as ours, Moldova, which NATO has a relationship with Moldova, and NATO's going to think, well, first it was Georgia, then it was, there was Chechnya, Georgia, Ukraine, now it's in Moldova. I mean, next is NATO. So do you want to do it in Moldova, or do you want to do it in NATO? And then you would have a conflict there. And so I do think there is a possibility, because that there isn't even Article 5 protections. It's not like 2.5 million people can stand against the entire might of not only Ukraine, but Belarus and Russia.
But again, I'm not even looking at Article 5 here, because before World War II, we had plenty of defense agreements that were not followed through with. So that's why when we're talking about this slow power creep...
step forward to continue to wind down that piece of paper. You get what I'm...
Yeah, sure, but I would compare Russia to, and Andrew and Bog Beef, maybe you guys would at least agree with this. I look at them much like I look at a lot of these leftist agents, activists, where they're going to keep going as far as they can go until they're stopped. So if you're somebody who is, let's say, one of those losing with grace conservatives, and you allow the leftists to take much more, for the sake of, mutual benefit, so I'll give a little bit and maybe they'll give a little bit back in return. And as a result, you get a lot of these horrible things going on in college campuses. So my whole point here is to say that leftists are going to keep going until they're stopped. And the same thing, in my opinion, is with Russia. You're not going to be able to reason with it. You're not going to be able to strike any deals with it. Russia breaks all of its promises. And at the end of the day, that is something that needs to be addressed. Because if it's not addressed, if Russia keeps going further in, then imagine if I'm right, Andrew, then we're going to have a way more expensive of a war on their hands, number one. And number two, if America decides to go full America first isolation turtleism, then we're going to wait until Russia acquires even more territory in Europe, again, helped a lot by China, which is still, pretty rapidly growing and advancing, because China needs a lot of the natural resources that Russia has, as well as what Ukraine has and what Europe has. So it's going to keep going.
First of all, you're living in a fantasy. It's not going to happen. They're not taking Poland. And
If
second,
we stop them.
you always ask me to imagine. Okay, imagine this.
Yes.
Imagine that I don't care if Russia took all of Europe. I don't care. Not my problem.
Well, what about
don't
how
care.
that would hurt America?
How would that hurt America?
Well, Europe is our main export market. If we lost our main export market, that would be a problem.
Why would they
for
suddenly
American
start taking our
manufacturers.
exports? The Russians didn't want to stop doing business with us at any point. It's Biden that shut down all the
Do you think that
importation of the
The Russians
fertilizer.
are not going to try to dominate that business. They're just going to allow the United States to continue to have the economic dominance it has now.
You guys play Risk way too much. You
But what
honestly
do. You
do.
mean
You
play
need to
Risk,
play.
dude?
You need to play Risk a little
I
bit
don't
less,
play- I
and
don't
get
play
back to the
Risk, okay?
real
If
world.
anything, I live
You
Risk,
think
okay? I don't
you
play
think
Risk.
these guys are world domination? It ain't like that.
Wait,
And I'm not. And I'm no. Let me be clear. I
Yeah.
am not the fucking guy above the Risk board moving the pieces around. And I'm not even one of the little soldiers. I'm the little crumb next to the soldier taking a picture of him.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm not
Andrew,
playing
did you know
Risk
that
over
Dylan
here.
was actually in Ukraine? That he was, he could have, God forbid, gotten hurt or injured. Or,
Wow, what a fool!
Oh, come on, Andrew.
Look,
That is, again, for somebody who's like both Andrew and me and Bog Beef, we're not going into these conflicts. So as far as like people who actually want to get the truth out, and again, you could assume that Dylan's lying or whatever, but the very fact that Dylan made his way there and, was catching fire, and for you to call him a fool, that's...
Yeah, I don't
that's a
think that
pretty
he's lying. I believe you, and he's a fool for that.
to risk your life going into Ukraine to take all of these, photos and all these documentary things. I think that there is
Yes, you're
absolutely
a
nothing,
fool. You're
nothing
absolutely
wrong
a fool
with
for that.
And for somebody like you, Andrew, who's not really, going into any of these places in order to get like a better grasp of what's going on.
I don't need to be two inches from a bullet to figure out what's going on. That's a retarded take, Lev.
Dylan, what do you think?
I mean, if Andrew doesn't appreciate the information you can get by having reporters on the ground in a war zone, then that's fine. I don't think he really relies on the ground reporting.
Tell me
very
what you
much.
learned that was so important. Tell me the big scoop you got, buddy.
Well, we were able to prove that the Russians were bombing aid workers while saving drowning people in Kherson.
Yeah, I really don't care. Don't care.
Okay, then.
Let's go back to MAGA. I do want to be fair to the MAGA position. I don't know if people don't know it, because you might what is the actual MAGA position on these kinds of matters? I think you see I think the closest person who I think most likely will be tapped. Well, I don't know if I can say. I'm not sure what I'm allowed. Well, yes, it was announced at one of those at the RNC. I think Eldridge Colby is probably the closest person to being you can read his Twitter. He's that would be like the MAGA foreign policy guy. And the MAGA foreign policy thing is basically you could take a look at Russia. It's the same way that we're the stance towards Taiwan is that if Europe is really concerned about this, Europe needs to start ponying up some money for defense, and they refuse to do so. And Taiwan is in the same way. Taiwan says, we're so afraid that China's going to take us over, but they refuse to spend any money on their own defense. And this is ultimately a European problem. And if Europe is not going to is not going to. This isn't the America. This is America's problem. This is Europe's problem, and they just refuse to spend any money on defense.
I hope Andrew didn't crash or something.
Well, I mean, do you mean physically crash or virtually
No, like
crash?
he's driving a car and like I hope everything's okay.
Yeah, no, I hope everything's okay too. It's just like a really shitty internet connection there. But to the point that Bog Beef was talking about, I kind of agree. Trump was talking earlier on about like how European nations should spend way more on their defense before Russia invaded Ukraine. And I believe he was making references to what Russia was already doing, again, under the Obama administration with its dumb little red lines that always keep getting crossed and nothing happens. So in a way, Dylan, the whole Rocket Man thing...
Does that sound familiar to you, by the way?
What
Red
does?
lines keep getting crossed and nothing happens?
Hmm.
I haven't heard of that before.
Yes, exactly. But again, when we're talking about Trump's view on Ukraine, to me it's very complicated because on one hand you do have a lot of the MAGA people that are, like Andrew, for instance, very much against supporting Ukraine. And then you also maybe have some people who know what's up, but are afraid to say something because, again, if you all of a sudden start to support Ukraine and you have a lot of MAGA people that are around you, like Bog Beef, if you were, for example, again, like somebody who one day saw the light, decided to support Ukraine, and you'd be making all these like pro-Ukraine posts, that would turn off a lot of your audience, wouldn't it?
I don't think our audience is super juiced up. It's just not a huge part of our thing. I mean,
sure, yeah.
When the topic comes up, we probably, if anybody, we just probably have the least amount of stuff about Israel, Palestine, Ukraine, any of this stuff.
Well, that's why I said in the very beginning when you were first here, yeah, sure.
Let me just say, Lev, like if I all of a sudden, right, I've been covering the war in Ukraine on the ground for 3 years now. This is going to be going on 4 once 2024 goes around. So I've been doing this more than any other type of content creation. And if I all of a sudden was like, wait a second, Ukraine is, oh my God, Ukraine's gay. And all of a sudden I just said, no, never mind. Russia actually was cool the whole time. And obviously I don't think that's going to happen. But if I did, I'd lose my entire audience. There's a financial incentive to not rebuild my ideological structure. There's a social incentive because everybody that I know in Ukraine wouldn't want to hang out with me anymore. All the people that I've, been in the trenches with and filmed with and all the people that I consider very close friends, you have to completely reform a lot of times who you are because for a lot of people, especially when they're hyper involved in politics, your politics becomes a part of who you are. It becomes a part of how you look at the world and it becomes your social circles. It becomes definitely when you're a content creator, a financial incentive. And so I think a lot of people, especially if this is your job and you socialize with people who agree and think the same way as you do, you have more than just the incentive of what is true and what is not keeping you where you are.
Well,
you want to stay comfortable.
And if people support you in pretty much any way online, they're expecting some level of representation there. This is why people let you know when they're upset with things that you said.
The whole patronage thing, that is a very big part of your whole channel, right? Like the patronage card.
Yes, and a patronage relationship is a two-way street, and people will let you know, hey, I'm not really a big fan of that. Maybe I'll pull my Patreon money or whatever it is. And people do expect to be represented in some of that. Did you guys see, by the way, article in Foreign Affairs, which is certainly no MAGA outlet, from the second?
I read.
Which, to quote it, since 2023, we keep going back to this 2023. I'm assuming they mean November. Washington has been out of ideas for how to successfully end the war on terms favorable to Ukraine. Mm-hmm. That doesn't sound very good.
Well, it depends because Foreign Affairs I love Foreign Affairs. I have every single one of their editions printed out. They will print out opinion pieces from like the Iranian foreign ambassador. They'll print out opinion pieces from anybody of any influence that has anything of interest to say in foreign policy just about. That is not to say that isn't an interesting perspective, but I promise you a week after an article like that is published in Foreign Affairs, there's another one saying 2 more years and Ukraine will win. And I've read those articles, so I know that's the case. In fact, I know some of the people who wrote those articles, but it depends on the strategy. But it is true that the United States doesn't really know necessarily how to guide Ukraine forward. in large part because it doesn't know what type of structural aid long term it's going to have. It's hard to plan long, like big offensives if you don't know how many bullets, how many tanks, how many et cetera you're going to have, or if you're going to win re-election and be able to approve the aid deals that would be necessary for new operations. And so it is kind of hard to plan because they don't have the structures in place to, I think, make those big overarching plans. I know, though, Zelensky, after the Kursk operation, is supposed to approach very soon Biden, the Trump campaign reportedly, which you don't know for sure, and Kamala Harris, showing them plans for Ukrainian victory, because they kind of see the Kursk operation as their first example of really successful combined arms warfare. And it's kind of like a pitch like, hey, look at what we've been able to figure out over the 3 years of fighting. We were able to subdue their communication infrastructure by dropping jammers over the border. We were able to surprise them. We used maneuver warfare. We took more territory in 4 or 5 months than Russia took in 4 and 5 months in 3 to 4 days in the Kursk region. Like, that's like their pitch that to try to convince them that they can still win. I don't want to ramble too much, but there was a lot of things that said, and I never got to respond to them, and I just wanted to clear a few things up. The Guerilla comment, I didn't mean to be rude when I interrupted. The only reason I disagree with you like a lot when it comes to Ukraine and the guerrilla stuff is that Ukraine has fought guerrilla wars against the Russians before, and they've been very vicious. They've been very bloody. And a lot of Ukrainians, when I talk to them about this possibility, if aid falls through and them take over, some of them will say and look me straight in the eye, like, I will fight until I am dead. And when I'm dead, sunflowers will grow out of my body. And therefore, I helped Ukraine anyway. And like, there are people who are diehard until the end. But at the end of the day, after seeing Bucha and all these massacres and all the violence, if you give Russia domination over all of Ukraine, it can use its resources. It will conscript from the local population, as it has done in other parts of Ukraine. It will reinforce its power, and it might be easier for them to integrate Belarusian units into it if the war is considered over. Then maybe they can bring other people in that wouldn't have come over to do military contracting work and otherwise. And all while this is going on, they're going to be arresting all of the civil thought leaders, all the people that made up the resistance of Ukraine. So while I understand that it would mean less ammunition, less money being necessary, and you could fight more of a guerrilla war, probably mean more death, probably mean more loss for Ukraine, and it would make the war a lot longer.
There's also the China angle as well, which I think we shouldn't ignore, like I was talking before, where China's got a lot of people and not enough resources to keep that whole party going, while Russia, on the other hand, tons of resources, and I believe that the amount of people, like in total in Russia, is not that far off from like the total population of Japan. So if we're talking about a potential for China to, again, like they might as well have all of Siberia right now. They recently acquired like this little island in Siberia, which would completely block Russia at any point from having access to an incredibly large amount of territory, if they want to. So my whole point here is that when people who are like Bog Beef, I completely understand the America First position and wanting to take care of things that have to do with migration and a lot of the issues that is currently being faced in the United States and the West in general. But if you rightfully, I think, on the right, see China as being like this, communist China, as this bugman type of totalitarian culture, it's not something that we would want to have an expansion of in the world in general. And I really believe that they are going to make the most use as they can of what's currently going on, and they would want Russia to keep expanding for as much as they are able to.
Well, if there's anything that's happened good from the America First standpoint out of this Ukrainian war, it could be good, but if we did anything about it, but it's blatantly obvious to everybody that we don't know how to make shit anymore. When people talk about like the America of World War II, when you look at America, my friend found this story. Like we called up a jukebox factory in Ohio and was like, hey, we need you to make guns now. And like within 3 weeks, they had made millions of guns. That America is gone. Our naval fleet is falling apart because we have no means to repair them anymore. These artillery shells, which artillery shells are the basis of warfare, we can't produce them anymore. And, this obviously leaves Ukraine in a bad place. I think we've given them all the artillery shells we have, and we can't make them anymore. And this is a big problem. China is awesome at this. China is they're if you want them, They have this sort of production capacity of 1950s America. We don't have anymore. And it's befuddling why we don't seem to want to do this anymore, and why we can't do it.
Dylan, any thoughts on that?
Sure. I mean, I think that there is definitely a problem with production in the United States. One story that really surprised me and that I found out through a compatriot was that when they wanted to restart Stinger lines, the Stinger missiles and those like arm-mounted like anti-aircraft weapons, which is very useful in Ukraine. I filmed with the crews that use them. They need them to take down like drones. They need them to take down any aircraft that's going to be close enough to drop like dumb bombs. And there's a shortage of them. But when they called up the people like, hey, let's get some people to go make these Stingers, there was no one, because we hadn't been making these Stinger missiles since like the Cold War. And so everyone who knew how to make these Stinger missiles were retired, and they had to call out grandpa and grandma out of retirement at like 70-something years of age to teach people how to make Stinger missiles and start up the production lines again. As for artillery production, I will say we've gotten some really good news updates recently. I think it was like a few days ago that the production plant in Pennsylvania says they have increased artillery production by more than 50% and are ahead of schedule for the artillery production increases meant to help support the Ukrainians. It's still not as many as the Russians are making, but if other European powers continue, as they should, and I agree with you, to invest in their own defense and invest in their own defense infrastructure, then I think combined that they can really make a lot of artillery shells. We just haven't needed this forever. We fought people in I don't want to be mean, but we fought people who were using AKs and hiding in caves. And usually you do not need 100,000 shells to take a cave with 3 guys in it and some RPGs. And so this is not the type of warfare our defense contractors were used to. They didn't need to sell all these shells, so they didn't make them. And instead they concentrated on the highly specialized precision weapons that the American government and other European powers wanted to fight jihadi groups throughout the Middle East. And now that this type of warfare has been reintroduced, a lot of European powers in the United States were caught with their pants down, and they're trying to scramble. That last package that was passed back in April, though, gave a lot of investment into artillery production, and now we're starting to see the benefits of that. I will say, though, when Colby talks about Europe needing to pay more, but more when I think Trump says that Europe needs to pay more, he keeps saying that we are paying more than the Europeans. But this is just not true. Europe contributes much more financially to the Ukrainians. We're the ones giving a lot of our older equipment, Vietnam Air equipment, and some new equipment, but mostly old equipment, that monetary value-wise ends up being much more than the defense articles that they're giving. But in total, Europe has given more, as in the European Union, and they're the ones doing the vast majority of the financing. When it comes to the money stuff, our stuff has been recently converted into loans, and I don't even know if we're going to do that in the future. It's probably only going to be weapons.
Yeah, Bog Beef, any thought? And we get Andrew Meyer back in the house here with the cowboy hat. But yeah, Bog Beef, do the things that Dylan is talking about here reassure you in any way about
Let me
what's
be clear,
going on
though.
here?
That doesn't reassure me. It's not enough. But when somebody says, as Trump has, we're spending more, which is not true, or that the Europeans still aren't doing anything, that's also not true. It depends on which European country. They're not, all one nation, and they have different policies.
Well, I mean, the MAGA goes by the percentage of their GDP, which, from what I understand, across Europe, it is very small. But when we talk about Europe, we're talking about France and Germany.
I hate to interrupt you, but one last thing. That has massively increased over the last 5 years. We went from like 7 nations passing the 2% threshold to I think 17 to 21 as of recently. So this is a positive development. Still not enough, but positive development.
But I mean, France and Germany is so much bigger than everyone else. They're who matters. And I would say, I'll become a neocon when we start doing this over Cyprus and Anatolia.
Wait, what about Cyprus and Anatolia specifically?
They need to be freed. I will turn into like the biggest, I don't know if there's a word like a Zionist or whatever for Cyprus and Anatolia.
Are you a Greek Cypriot?
No, my friends are though, and I'm very sympathetic. And that didn't happen all that long ago. There's people still alive.
Yeah, no, 50 years ago. We just all like, oh, okay, you're NATO ally, Turkey. We'll just ignore that kind of happened.
Yeah,
there's people that are still alive. They know where their house is.
Yep. But that is also a question of values, isn't it? Like if we look
back. Which, by
the
way, can I just say?
Sure.
I know a million stories like that for people living in Donetsk, Luhansk. My fixer, Bogdan, he used to be a Protestant Christian in Donetsk, and they don't like Baptists particularly because they see them as like American agents and Protestants. And so They had to flee because all their churches were taken and turned into military bases.
Isn't that like a starověrší, like old believers? Because that is sort of a Protestantism, I guess you could say, if we're being very... but anyway, if we're talking about... like honor and like these qualities that a lot of conservatives like. I assume Andrew and Bog Beef, you guys are very, you appreciate honor, I'm sure. And when it comes to something that happened with the horrible East Palestine disaster, with the train wreck, we had, the guy who was supposed to be in charge of infrastructure, Pete Buttigieg, I believe he was taking a little vacation around that time, a little maternity leave. So if this was, I don't know, somewhere in like the 1910s or 1920s, you would think that there would be more of an outcry, like this person who is supposed to be like, the torch being passed on to them from the founding fathers, they're supposed to be so honorable, they're taking a vacation while this horrible incident is going on, and only after Trump came there did Pete Buttigieg, put on the work clothes and come there. And I think that people who are on the right look at that and they say, okay, we're living in the time of decadence. We're living in the time of celebrity culture and a time when a lot of these values don't really seem to be reflected in our leaders, and the leaders don't give a shit about the people. They're not being good stewards, good philosopher kings, if you will, towards the people. And not that I'm saying that we need a dictator. I've always been against dictatorship. But to have that kind of quality of responsibility, I think that rightfully so, a lot of people on the right, you could say, well, maybe Trump's not the guy who has it, but at least that's the water in the desert that they're desperately yearning for, Dylan. And like, you understand what I'm saying here, right? Like, we're not really seeing as much of this, with people like Pete Buttigieg.
This like personal integrity, you mean?
Yeah, and we are seeing it ironically in Ukraine. That is where we are seeing a lot more of that kind of honor. But as far as just the American system, you could see why a lot of the conservative, people on the right are looking at it today and just spit on it and just want to throw it in the trash because they just see just how vanity prone, how much of it, again, it's like the college girl sorority ditz. That's what they look at it as.
I don't know. It's always hard to know exactly who is who until you're in a crisis. When the rubber really hits the road and shit turns into shit, like there's a giant hurricane or there's some big terror attack.
Yeah.
How public officials respond to those
East
crises.
Palestine. That's the perfect example.
Yeah, East Palestine. Exactly.
Yeah.
Another East Palestine would be one example. Another one would be the blackouts in Texas. Like the vacation was not, I would think, a very smart move. There was examples of like hurricanes before, but there's bad response to crises. I think showed the integrity of people because it shows your ability to put whatever you're doing down, respond to the immediate needs of your constituents, what you were signed up to do, and it shows your leadership skills. Your leadership skills come through, and all the stories that come through it about how you interacted with the public, how you interacted with the people around you, can show somebody's personal integrity, or if they're more interested in like, wait, when are the CNN cameras coming by to like film like, the avalanche so I can make sure I'm in frame, etc.
Ultimately,
that reminds me of when Puerto Rico had their disaster. Trump immediately got them aid, but then the liberals running Puerto Rico literally kept the aid in warehouses, like let the water become heated up and full of plastic, like spoiled the aid just so that they could try and blame Trump somehow. Very sick. And Pete Buttigieg should be in prison for being a sodomite. But Lev, I'm curious, who are you voting for, Lev? Because Kamala obviously would continue the money train for Ukraine, which you care about so much, and Trump not so much, but he's obviously the better choice for America. Who are you voting for, Lev?
Andrew, number one, that's none of your business. I do not reveal
you're voting for Kamala!
I'm not going to reveal personal political things here on BTR.
You're voting Kamala!
That is none of your business, buddy. But the one thing that I want to say to that, though, is that let's assume that is correct, what happened in Puerto Rico. Obviously, that's bad, but in that case, Dylan, we do have a lot of people who are on the left who are on the side of, these Puerto Rican commie people.
For me, the people of Puerto Rico has been failed by the entire country. Number one, the question of their personal representation is not being decided or really settled by its domestic political leadership, which has left them in a weird limbo. And the question of its debt, which is very hesitant to be acted on by the federal government, also leaves them in a limbo. And so we've just all accepted that this is the limbo we're living in. We don't know if they're going to be independent. We don't know if they're going to be a state. So they're just kind of this weird in-between area where they're not going to have voting senators or voting congresspeople or representatives that could go during these, say, scrambles for an infrastructure deal, advocate for rebuilding of homes that still have tarps over them from the hurricane. There's still people living with tarps over their heads from the damage that was done because they never got the money to repair their home.
But how much does that also talk about, the political elite within Puerto Rico itself? Because sure, you could say that, maybe it's more of the responsibility of the United States as like
also,
the older cousin.
can I just say, how did that plot work, by the way? When they put the aid in there, how do we know that they left it into rot? How do we know that was to bully Trump?
I can't believe that you're voting for Kamala, Lev. I can't believe it.
Andrew,
She wants
I
to
didn't
let
say
all these
anything
illegals
yet.
get citizenship.
Is he
She'll
like
end the
my
country.
dad?
Andrew,
Your question's not important. I can't believe that Lev is going to vote for Kamala.
I'm
I
not
can't believe
revealing a
it.
single thing. I'm not saying a single thing about my personal politics. That's not what this stream is about. It's about ideas, the exchange of ideas, which is why, Andrew, as much of a firebrand as you are, I do appreciate, certain things you're talking about here as far as Puerto Rico and all that. And sure, Dylan, I'm willing to actually go on the side with Andrew here for a second and say I am very much sure looking
Angry
at
me
the level
and the rest of the sodomites. I understand.
Yes, exactly. I'm talking about like with Puerto Rico specifically,
Gotcha.
when we're talking about these political elites that Puerto Rico has and a lot of other like much more, let's say, other than some of the crypto billionaires that like buying up places in Puerto Rico right now, it is more of a third world country. And this, I think, is also a very big problem with people who are both on the neoconservative and the neoliberal side when we're talking about certain architects of the Iraq War, for instance. They don't have the kind of wisdom that I think the giants on whose shoulders they're standing had when it comes to judging culture. And I think a lot of this also comes from the leftism that seeped into the education system and the colleges back when people like Paul Wolfowitz, for instance, were growing up. Because Paul Wolfowitz, he looked at the Iraqis as being people who can handle democracy. What it should have been, if we're talking about Iraq for a second, just my personal opinion, not anybody else's, if we were to do it correctly, we should have gone full British Empire mode. We should have occupied that place with our own people, enforced justice, much like the British did, and just turned it into an American colony and had a project that would have lasted several centuries in order to get people who are, centuries, in order to get the people who are in there into the kind of state where they would be able to participate in the same way that the Ukrainians can. And I think it's a similar problem that's going to be with Russia, because I do see a difference between the Russians and the Ukrainians. If you take a look at like old photos of Russian peasants versus Ukrainian peasants, the Ukrainian peasants, they're dressed really well, they got like these frilly outfits and the stuff, while the Russian peasants are dressed like complete farm animals. And this is not their fault. They were invaded by the Mongols, and the Mongols really screwed things up with so many of the Russians into this horrible PTSD state of servitude. So my point here is that it's not about race, but it is about culture. And culture gets passed on, and people start getting into certain habits, and before you know it, you have a bunch of people that love somebody like Putin who says, we're going to invade, Poland next, and we're going to keep going, we're going to expand the Russian Empire, it doesn't matter if, you don't have running water, and they're like, go Russia. You see what I'm getting at, right? Like this irresponsibility of today's American elites of not looking at the actual level of people's culture and making decisions based on that. Because if they were to do that, I bet they would have had a different opinion even of Russia when they would have even seen the faces of these fucking Russian oligarchs and these fucking people who are in charge. Then if they would have actually paid attention to that, I don't think they would have had this romanticism that they have with Russia, thinking that it's some kind of a, like Trump was talking about, they beat Napoleon, and they beat Hitler and all this kind of stuff. You get what I'm trying to say here, right?
You're saying that like different, there was two sections of that. I think
Sure.
Part of it was about like how culture interacts with governance, and assuming that governance or the governments you just bring to people, that the cultures will immediately adapt to that is naive.
Extremely
and I do agree to that, and that's why like democracy is, there's not like a one form-fit-all version of democracy. Like everywhere we go, they're gonna have a secretary of state, they're gonna have a president, they're gonna have a vice president. It doesn't make sense, especially if there's overarching like tribal relationships that have existed for centuries that the people there desperately want to be still represented. If you go there and try to force it on them, that will have friction that could lead to violence, conflict, and just bad outcomes for everybody, including the people who are unhappy and including the people who are trying to bring democracy.
And it's not only tribal though. There are some cultures that think much more in the moment.
But I do want to say that the idea that democracy in and of itself is the idea because some peoples can just never do it, so they have to have authoritarian leaders and stuff like that. I think that's pushed mostly by said authoritarian leaders in order to justify their own existence. Democracy is not easy. Democracy is very difficult, especially at its beginning when it's unstable and there hasn't been a culture born of democracy like we're seeing right now with Eastern Africa and the coups that are going on. But just because it's difficult does not mean it's not worth building. It just might not be the responsibility of the United States or the imperative or even the ability of the United States to bring democracy to everyone, everywhere, all the time, all at once.
How do I say this? Have you ever heard of the term milling about?
I've heard the term, yes.
So
Bog
Bog
Beef. I don't
Beef.
know if you mean it in a different way.
Bog Beef, you're familiar with milling about, right?
I am. I got to split, guys.
All right, Bog Beef, where can people find you before you go?
Patreon.com/goodoldboys, GOODOLBOYZ. Thanks, guys.
Guys, support the Good Old Boys podcast, please. So when it comes to milling about, in terms, again, just to be very clear, I'm not talking race, I'm talking culture. I'm talking the things that get passed on to people over a really long span of time. You have certain cultures out there that are way, way more in the moment. They don't think as much of the consequences of what's going to happen, several years from now. They're just more, living in the moment. And unless there is like a huge project where a lot of them have access to the kind of institutions that would be able to, slowly again over years, maybe decades, maybe centuries, start to change that. If the end result is still like people who are living in the moment, I don't trust people who live in the moment with democracy.
I think you have a point there, but the way you said it, like the United States, British Empire,
yeah,
the United States being the one to lord over people, I think will inherently cause friction if you lord over people like that. When you look at the history of colonialism, while people say at the end you ended up with something, you had some roads and you had a institution. In between there's usually a ton of rebellions and riots and stuff that was put down, scattered upon that like colony's history.
Yeah, I wonder
I'm not so sure that a colony in Iraq is going to be, definitely when you talk about the amount of financing it would take to maintain a military force so we are the ones that are controlling it consistently, especially if it's just us and not a coalition, because I don't know who else would sign up for such an endeavor. It just makes invading Iraq just as bad as it was an idea the first time.
It's so amazing for me to hear you say that about what a bad idea it would be to finance the military of a small operation. It's not going to be able to fight against an overwhelming force. It reminds me of Ukraine. If the U.S. hadn't stuck its nose in to Ukraine, there would be no war right now. Tens of thousands of Ukrainians would be alive today if the United States had not propped up this war. I am for peace. I don't want to see death. The U.S. should not have propped up this war, should not have forced basically all these Ukrainians to get drafted by Zelensky into this pointless war. I'm for peace. The U.S. should never have gone into the Middle East, should never have propped up Zelensky. This would all have been over a long time ago. Under Trump, there was peace. Under these retarded Democrats, there's war. Lev, if you vote for Kamala, you're a traitor to the United States, and we should deport your ass to Ukraine.
Andrew, you would never... Wait. Yes, go on, Dylan.
There's a few beautiful things I just want to say, okay? Because I think he convinced me. I was thinking about the similarities between Iraq and Ukraine, and I was like, I remember seeing a gun in Ukraine, and if I remember or not, there were a few guns in Iraq as well. There were also tanks, I think, and probably a plane or two. And so when you really break it down, these wars are very, very similar. So I think he has a point there. But these wars, when you talk about Ukraine and Iraq, they're totally different. They're totally different. The interests of the United States at play in Iraq is an American military force invading another country where our force is going to have to occupy, our forces are going to have to die in order to do that, and we're going to have to bring these coffins home, not based upon any previous promises we had made, but to destroy weapons of mass destruction that were not there in the first place. When we talk about Ukraine, we talk about no American soldiers dying because we don't have any troops there. Outside of the special operators that like operate near the embassy to protect the embassy because it is a country at war. We don't have any troops there, so that's not a problem. We're supplying them with weapons to fulfill a promise we made in the 90s because they gave up their nuclear arsenal for our protection, for the world protection, for everybody else's protection. When you look at the different nuances here, they're really not the same at all. They're totally different. One's a defensive war, the other is an offensive war. One, we're just giving foreign aid. The other, we're directly invading. The other, their troops will deal with the occupation and the managing of the state. And the other, we have to do all of that, fund all of that, and it's going to cost us trillions, much less than what this is costing us, especially since much of it is our old equipment. So no, I don't think these wars are terribly similar at all.
So the old equipment part.
We've sent military contractors to Ukraine, acting like we have no forces there is either like
Which
a
military
lie,
contractor?
or you just have no idea what you're talking about.
Which
There's videos of it.
contractor?
You can go and look it up. Just because I can't
Google
give you
it.
the
It's on
name
the
like it's
internet, I
black,
think.
like it's Blackwater. You know what? I didn't
Then what
interrupt
did they
you, and
do
I made a
then?
mistake. I should never have been civil. What a mistake
You
to
were
be
never
civil with you and
civil.
let you
were
finish
never
your
civil.
thought.
You called me
I
the
was civil
F-slur.
from the start. You were belligerent, and you got to roll over. You got to interrupt because your points are bad. You have no perspective in the world. What you're
Find
saying
these
is
people, Lev.
idiotic. You and people like you funding this idiotic war are responsible for the deaths of these Ukrainians. It would have been over months and months and months ago. Idiots like you are the reason these people are dead.
Wow. You know, that really stuck with me. I feel immense guilt. And it's gonna be
Sarcasm
very
is for
difficult to
losers.
Okay.
All right, Andrew. Outro time. Go for it.
Thank you, Lev. That was a lot of fun. You can find me on Twitter or X now. Elon has finally earned the name change. So x.com/theandrewmeyer. I go on Luke Rudkowski's show somewhat frequently these days at We Are Change. So check him out. And buy the Alex Jones video game, alexjonesgame.com. And if you're listening to this and you're not sure who you're going to vote for, under Trump, there was peace. Under Trump, there was no war in Ukraine. Under Trump, there was no massive war in the Middle East. And if we get Trump, I think we'll have peace again. Obviously, there's going to be problems no matter who's elected based on what the sickos in the geopolitical arena are setting up. They want us to have famine. They want us to have financial problems. So they're setting up all kinds of awful things no matter who wins for 2025. Their Agenda 2030 is in play. But we need to have Trump to have a chance for this nation to win, to have a chance for this nation to rebuild manufacturing, as your buddy Bog Beef was discussing. We have to have Trump to win. Lev, if you're thinking about voting for Kamala Harris, God forbid, this country needs to stand, and the only way it's going to do it is with President Trump. Thanks for having me on. And Dylan, you were very spirited. It was a fun debate, and I'll give you that, brother.
Okay. You have a good one, Andrew. My turn?
Thank you.
Yes.
So, the first thing I want to say is the peace angle. Trump, I don't consider a peace candidate. I don't consider him a peace candidate because he never sold himself as a peace candidate. He said he was going to blow up the families of terrorists on the campaign trail. And when he got into office, he massively expanded the drone war to immense proportions and then restricted the information we could access on said drone war. He blew up Soleimani, which caused their troops to get bombed in Iraq. It was a really big confrontation with the Iranians. And the Iranians really, really hate Trump. And if he gets back into office, I am almost certain that he's going to have a lot of conflict with the Iranians, which he seems to be pretty open about. He's also proposed invading Venezuela in private conversations with his staff once he got particularly angry that his new president of Venezuela was not openly accepted. And these parts of Trump are always put to the side when we're talking to his nationalist fans. We never talk about invading Venezuela. We don't talk about what would have happened if the North Korea shit actually went down and we went to war with North Korea and what that means for nationalism and being isolationist. We don't talk about the bombing of Syria that he did, the bombing of the Iranian militias, or him finishing Obama's military operations in Syria and never withdrawing our troops fully, always flip-flopping on the issue depending on who is whispering in his ear. So here's a question I have. If we get the CEO of Lockheed Martin to just whisper in Trump's ear enough, is that going to be enough to manipulate him towards the ends of the most bloodthirsty war maniacs in the American State Department? I think probably A lot of it depends on the last person who whispers in his ear, how Trump's feeling, or how people view him, because I think he's very image-based. I mean, his whole thing is his image. His whole thing is his brand. So I disagree with his characterization as Trump as a peace candidate. Thank you for the $5, Grassroots. As for the conversation we had, there's a lot of things we didn't get to go into. For example, we didn't get to go into why Russia wanted Kamala to win. I think that's pretty silly, considering Kamala Harris's national security advisor is Philip Gordon, who believes that we let the Russians kind of win in Syria and wish we were a lot tougher on them. So it doesn't make sense that the Russians would be excited to elect somebody who has an advisor who is actively saying, challenge the Russians.
How tough are we talking, though?
Support Ukraine. Tough enough that the thing he was yelling about earlier, Timber Sycamore, he wanted to go further than that.
Very interesting.
So when we say, to me, them wanting her to win doesn't make sense. I don't understand why they would want her to win. The same reason I don't think they wanted Hillary to win, because I think that she is going to be aligned with the American foreign policy establishment that is not positive towards the Russians and is going to continue to support Ukraine, which she has. So it doesn't make sense that the Russians would want Kamala to win if she's the one saying she wants to fund Ukraine and Trump is the one says it'll be over before he's even in office, which would assume no more weapons to Ukraine.
If I was to be a bit of a devil's advocate here, though, to kind of wrap this all up, if we are talking about this article that my friend Vladislav Davidson wrote, where he talked about the ineptness of the current American administration when it comes to supporting Ukraine, where Ukraine felt like, hey, these guys aren't allowing us to proceed further on, to fire our rockets into Russian territory. So
Trump might commit. Trump might say, screw it. If we're going to do it, we're going to do it.
Yeah, because, and again, I'm not saying that is what's going to happen, but...
might.
Yeah.
He might. But the problem is that, and I've talked about this, in my mind, if Trump wins, and this, in my mind, is the funniest outcome. Trump wins, someone's on TV and is like, man, Russia really is Antifa and gay, and Trump won't be mean. What? There's something along those lines, though. And Trump is weak on Russia. The Russians are now going to play him in negotiations. He's in negotiation with Putin, and Putin's asking for what he would want, which would be maximalist demands if he thinks Trump has already timed himself out by saying it's going to be over before the election. Trump gets pissed, and his other option, which he said, is, I'll fund Ukraine even more. And so if they piss him off enough, he might say $100 billion to Ukraine, not 60, $100 billion, because we have got to show strength on the world stage. And not only would that piss off all the greatest people, and it would be very, very funny. I will say, though, on Syria, he said he was going to pull out, and then he pulled his troops out. A bunch of people got killed. Then he redeployed them. And then he said he was going to pull them out again, and did it. And he kept flip-flopping on it, and it cost people lives. And so if Trump in one moment is like $100 billion, but then the next moment is like, never mind, what the Ukrainians need right now is stability and a long-term plan to get peace. The more opportunities and risks the Russians sees to get pathways to victory, like just waiting out Trump until he changes his mind, I think that, if anything, could egg them on a little bit. I don't know. So for me, Trump is a bigger risk when it comes to supporting Ukraine.
I mean, it's very much possible what you're saying here. I just see it almost like in a mythological way, where we have these two different sides, where one is supposed to be like this very orderly, trying to balance everything out, but at the same time also having this sense of irresponsibility in a different light, in the light of, well, we are all just like a bunch of these lawyers, and we're going to decide on this very neutral position that's going to ensure, it's like when you make a movie by a committee. You know what I mean? Like when you have all these producers in the room and they just create like some slop that's going to appeal to the lowest common denominator and not really stand out, versus something that is, much more avant-garde, much more dynamic. So in that sense, I could definitely understand the risks of what we're talking about here with Trump. But the thing that I'm concerned about the most when it comes to the old guard, if we're talking about the neoconservatives, neoliberals, whatever, is how long do people like that have to run a society in the way they've currently been running it before certain elements, be they on the far right or the far left, just overtake them, especially if we're talking about like the far left. It's almost like, I like to say, like in Lion King, Uncle Scar and the hyenas. when it comes to using certain elements like Antifa, BLM, things of that nature, and then having them go after you and eat you. You know what I mean? Like, these are things that I could see playing themselves out when we're having, like, these people that want to maintain the status quo and may be completely ambivalent and not care about any of these far-left ideas, but their weakness is something that ends up undoing them over time. So I don't know, like, I'm not really seeing a good scenario either way here, and I think we need something, something completely different from what we have right now.
I think that I've always been angry about in the Trump era, everything's against Trump, and there wasn't a positive vision. And I think that choosing, and maybe I'm kind of showing my colors a little bit, but choosing Waltz as somebody who got a lot done in a very short period of time in his state. You might not like what he did. You might not like him as a person. Most people seem to. But Waltz got a lot done when it comes to free school lunches, $1 billion invested into public housing, all of the stuff he got done domestically. That is a positive vision that he could sell on the national stage. And when Kamala was talking about 3 million new homes, $25,000 assisted down payment, and stuff like that, to me, that's a glimmer of a positive vision that could be offered in counterance to Trump.
Yeah, but that seems like a repeat of 2008, isn't it? When we're talking about the people getting all these houses they can't afford. I don't know. It just doesn't make any sense.
Well, we have a housing crisis. We need to build more houses if we're going to bring the housing costs down. Not build houses and just give them to anybody, but build houses because there needs to be more houses for the housing costs to come down generally. No?
I don't know. I'll be honest, I'm not really a big expert when it comes to housing, so I refuse to take part in things that I can't offer any direct expertise in.
I think this requires a supply side solution.
I personally think that it requires a solution when it comes to making sure that we have enough people in the United States and in the West in general who have a higher level of I don't know if awareness is the right word, or civilization, or whatever you want to call it. I don't think people are blank slates. At the same time, I believe there's always exceptions no matter where you look, and that's why we can never have any kind of, like some of the further right people want, any kind of regime that would discriminate based on things that people have no control over. But I do believe that there may come a time when there should be discrimination over things people do have control over, if you catch my drift. You know what I mean? That's not something that people like to talk about, but I want the ship of civilization to keep sailing. And looking around, I see a lot of dumb people, and I see a lot of people who think in the moment,
I want to preserve democracy. I believe in democracy. I do believe it. But
we don't have democracy.
Wait, let me.
Sure.
We have a republic. I get the idea. Look, we have a civilizational republic. Okay, we have a little cute republic, but we need an educated citizenry in order to have an effective republic. Because if you don't have an educated citizenry, then the people who are making decisions who gets to office, those politicians, even if they might start with a focus on how to govern the state, that's why I have an interest in politics. The more that people can benefit from, like, selling other things, like for example, entertainment, as to get them in the office instead of good experience and legislative potential and good policy positions, the worse it's going to be. So we have to have a public that can be appealed to by people's policies. I almost wish that American politics was boring like Germany's. I wish our politicians were all basically Angela Merkel, just clones of Angela Merkel.
Don't say that.
Wait, no, let me finish. All Angela Merkel, and appearance in gray and all of that.
Okay.
And all they did was go up there and give their experience and give their policies and answer to stuff semi-directly.
Yeah, but not let all the third worlders in. Again, not discriminating on race, discriminating on culture. So when it comes to education, though, I think of a young Joseph Stalin, who, did not come from a very, wise family, you could say. He was pretty backwards, but he grew up during a time when a lot of these people in these intellectual circles were reading all kinds of books, were getting all kinds of influence, and that is an example of a midwit who got overeducated and thought, hey, I know what I'm going to do. And we got what we ended up getting with the Soviet Union and the starvation and all of that. Same thing, I guess you could say about Chairman Mao. The reason why I'm saying this is the
problem I have though with this though is I don't like where some of this logic might extend, because this is the logic that was used by the Soviet Union to gather all the reindeer herders and say, you guys are a bunch of savages. You're just hunting reindeers all day. we're going to do this with you now. We're going to take away your lifestyle. We're going to quote unquote civilize you. And to be quite frank, if you go to these areas of Russia, how much have they benefited from that civilizational push when it comes to how they can govern their own affairs, how they live in the quality of life? Some have benefited, others have not, and they live in destitution. And so I don't know necessarily. This mentality cannot lead to, I am just here to bring you aid and assistance and help with your toilet and make sure that the water's running, and we're going to bring you. A lot of it can end up being, you need to serve our ends, and it's an excuse for making them serve their ends.
Yeah, that's very much possible too. But on the other side of the coin, if we have an education system here in the United States with the Department of Education and all that, that kind of relies, much like doctors rely on people eating McDonald's, it kind of relies on always needing more money to keep it going. And when they're saying, like, why is the education so bad? Well, give us more money and it's going to be better. But that's never the way that it works. I'm sorry, I see a lot of teachers as being nothing more than parasites, and maybe some of them have good intentions, but they're not wise people by any means.
I love public school teachers.
Oh, God, I don't know what's wrong with you, man. But
I
don't.
support your local teachers union.
I don't know, I just see them as losers, man. Like, I really don't see anything that substantial about them.
There's so many public school teachers have inspired people to go out and be involved in their careers. I have great public school teachers that helped me.
Oh,
encouraged me.
All the best then, man. Like, I don't know, maybe you got lucky. But from my school experience, and it wasn't public school, it was like this, a Catholic school that I went to, I wouldn't say I got anything out of most teachers, and I wouldn't really say that they helped me. One thing that helped me the most, I'd say, would be the influence that I got from my family as far as the kind of books that they gave me to read and things like that. You know what I mean?
Can I respond to a comment from somebody who donated $5 and they wanted to ask me about the Orthodox Church?
Yes.
I think it might have been one of the viewers from your community, so I thought, why not?
Go for it.
I don't know if it is. Code 5601, I don't know if that's one of your guys. This is not one of mine.
I don't know.
Either way. His question is, Ukraine is attacking the Orthodox Church, which in large part kept this tradition alive. They are committing cultural suicide in a vain attempt to build anew. I mean, so I could get into the nuance of it, but to answer it quickly, just to ignore the nuance, so many churches have split off from other churches and then built beautiful, independent cult. Like, where did Protestantism even come from? What did Martin Luther do? Would people say that was committing like suicide for Christianity? I bet for Catholics that were devout, it probably felt like that. It felt like the entire foundations of their church and everything that they've ever believed in is being insulted by these upstarts who are now disregarding that tradition. But if you look at the Ukrainian priests that are trying to reform the church, they're terrified of the Russian domination of the Russian Orthodox Church.
As they should be.
Which they use as a spine apparatus, to be blunt, not only in Ukraine, but also in the United States. People don't know this because it's not widely reported, but Russian agents were caught trying to enter the United States with clear instructions on how to infiltrate Orthodox churches in the United States and turn them into spies to spy on Americans. That's not to encourage fear-mongering. That's just to say what the Russians want to do with the Orthodox Church as an institution.
Not only that, there's more. The FSB agents are made up of a lot of these priests, and that's been the case since the USSR, where you still have people like Kirill, who's in charge of the Russian Orthodox Church. He was a KGB agent back in the day.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
And he said openly, if you go to Ukraine and you fight and you die killing Ukrainian soldiers, you just go to heaven. Like, this is as close as you get to, like, saying this is basically holy war. Mm-hmm. And if you're Ukraine and the head of an organization is saying it is holy to attack you, in order to keep that church inside you is national suicide, not cultural suicide. From a defense perspective, from a survival perspective, when you're being invaded by the largest country on the planet. And can I just say earlier, when he said NATO was at Russia's doorstep, so is Mongolia, so is China, so is half the world, because Russia is the largest country in the world, and its border spans from Vladivostok to Murmansk down to the Belarus, which it thinks should include it. In fact, Russia's whole problem here is they think that the largest country on the planet needs to be larger.
Yeah, and again, all that largeness is going to be taken over by China, I think, anyway, and it already has in Siberia. But let's get to the super chats over here on my end, and this is not a super chat, but...
Can I use the bathroom first? Would that
absolutely.
Be okay?
Go to the bathroom right now, Dylan. Yes, we don't want you to explode. So anyway, guys, if you guys are enjoying this program, by the way, all of the fans of Dylan Burns, let me just tell you a little bit about what Break the Rules is and what I do here. So I bring on people who come from completely different social circles, like we had today with Andrew Meyer and Dylan, as well as Bog Beef. But it's not always just political. Like, I have conversations with people about religion, about esotericism, about philosophy, and I have a lot of people who come from like this very online circle of YouTubers and commentators who are interested in Nietzsche, Carl Jung, things like that. And a lot of it also has to do with like uncovering ancient religions. Why is it that we believe the kind of things that we believe today? As well as Jason Rezajurjani, whose episodes I highly recommend you guys look up. He is a genius, and there's not a lot of people who are like him. And if you want to watch additional episodes, as well as actually go to New York City, where I have a condo, and Dylan, by the way, brother, you're invited to go to Manhattan and to have a live BTR episode in Manhattan. And if you guys become a patron, patreon.com/breaktherules, and specifically if you become a $20 patron, you guys are going to have the opportunity to watch the show live in New York City. And then we're going to have a nice rooftop party up on the roof. It's a very nice roof. We're going to have drinks and stuff. And it's going to be like a small crowd of maybe like 7 people. But those are going to be the events that I'm going to be doing a lot more of. The first one being with Jason Rezajurjani, happening soon. And I think Styx Hexenhammer 666 should be coming into New York City as well. So we're going to be having an event with him. And I am very, very appreciative of the fact that Dylan Burns, that you're here today, brother, because I know that you are more towards the left than I am. I wouldn't say that I'm on the right. Like, I consider myself to be a classical liberal for all that would mean today. But as you could see, we align on certain things, and others we don't align. But at the same time, we're capable of having a very civil discussion and figuring these things out. Sometimes it doesn't work, but I kind of like the chaos. Like, I think you knew, like, when Andrew Meyer was being the way that he was being, what to expect.
It's just that, man, I like my channel.
I know. My apologies that... and it's not, it's not something you could always control when it comes to what people end up saying. But now I know that he is way too dangerous of a firebrand to put on with people who have a channel on Twitch. So that is noted. I did not expect that to happen from the guy, but now we know.
That conversation was interesting for a few reasons, because the conversation was supposed to start about how the Russians are using money in the space to spread misinformation, disinformation, and affect domestic political division, and then immediately shifted into a lot of stories that were just either completely made up, fabricated, or misrepresented by probably the same actors that were being financed by the Russians to spread such information. I thought it was interesting, conceptually, at least.
Yeah, I don't know what to tell you, man. Like, I don't think we're ever going to get to a point where most of the people who are within the pro-Trump side are going to agree with you, but it is always helpful to see, like, where people are coming from. And, maybe after Trump, there's going to be room for some kind of a third-party situation going on here. Anyway, let us go into Super Chats over here. So we have from the Dashing Rogue, $4.99. I hope they pitch Lauren and Liam along with Caleb Maupin, Haz, Infrared, Hinkle, Richard Spenny, and Tucker.
What was those names?
Lauren, I guess Lauren.
What was the question about them?
He's just saying, I hope they pitch. Is it pinch? Did he mean to say pinch?
Oh, they should pitch them to the agents.
Yeah, exactly.
Infrared, I know Infrared went with Hinkle to Russia to do trips. Hinkle's, I think, if you were to make me put money on who else is Hinkle, I mean, he dressed up like a toy soldier, got in a tank, and drove around. Like, you don't get access to that equipment if you're not willing to work with the Russian government in a few ways. And he constantly lies on their behalf. So, I mean, he would be the one I think is most obvious. Infrared, I think he might be one of the ones that are doing it because he believes it and doesn't want to get paid. So I don't even think he's doing it for money.
Very interesting. And over here, Carl of RNG Podcast 499, Lev, this was a good show. Went way off the rails, but it didn't get too insane for the show standards. So thank you very much. And we got a super chat from the
What a
great
show.
Philip Daniel. Lev's a gifted animator too. You can find his animated shorts as his other channel, Lev Polyakov 2. Yeah, I can't believe I called it Lev Polyakov 2. I think it was whatever. Anyway.
Well, I'm Dylan Burns TV, so you
Dylan,
know.
everybody subscribe, but probably like the people who are
course.
watching this have already subscribed to you. And out of curiosity, Dylan, what kind of an
Yes.
audience would you say that you have? Because I really am curious about the differentiation.
You know, most of my audience is older than me because I'm 23 and I've been doing this for a little bit, but most of my audience is older than me. Recently, I've got more boomers, people who older people tend to support Ukraine more than younger people.
True.
So that has meant that I've gotten more of an influx of people who want updates and want on the ground reporting who are older. I have more Europeans now because I'm covering stuff in Europe, more Poles, more Germans, more Brits because English speaking, so it's much easier for them. But of course, a decent amount of Ukrainians too. I've been approached by a few Ukrainians, including one from Limon while I was in Kramatorsk and I was filming in the area. So I know I have Ukrainian fans as well. That's happened a few times. But most of my audience is still, at least over 50 or 60% of it is still American though. So it's still an American-dominated audience.
And as far as their political leanings?
Oh, sorry. That's much more interesting to me than that right there. For the political leanings, I'd say most of my audience is left-wing. I'd have some people that probably consider them centrist, center-right. Not really anybody that would consider themselves right or far-right or any.
So a lot of people who like...
Unless they're here for hippy-dippy. If they're here for my hosted debates, then they'll tune in and be like, I'll stomach Dylan for a minute or two.
Well, why would you say that they can't stomach you like the people who are more right wing?
I mean, I don't know. I try not to be too rude or too mean, but I'm usually pretty blunt. I prefer to be blunt. And so, sorry, people are asking me questions and I have the like audio thing on.
I understand, yeah.
Somebody asked if you believed in aliens, actually.
My mind is open, but again, your mind could be too open that it all drips out of there. I understand that,
Yes.
but I am open to the idea that there are beings that are beyond, our current comprehension. I don't believe in this Truman Show-like thing. You remember, like, when Truman was in class and the teacher said, well, there's nothing left to explore anymore. You know what I mean? Like this idea that, well, we figured everything out. You know, I really don't buy that.
Remember, I forgot there was this like article written in like 1898 or something. It was like, we've invented everything. We don't need patents anymore.
Yeah. But as far as the politics go, your audience who you say, like when you say like left, like they would, support public schools, they would support free healthcare.
I would say they're generally people who would consider social democrats. I do have socialists and communists, but most of them are either, I would say, moderately that way, or they're of some democratic garden variety, like Bernie Sanders, mostly like Bernieites, because I used to campaign for Bernie when I was getting into politics. He, like many other people, encouraged me to get into politics. But I would say like that type of left wing. We don't have any like, I don't know.
The infra has tankies, that kind of stuff.
No, those people despise me.
Yeah.
Jackson Hinkle is actively wished for my death.
No, God, that's horrible. But it is kind of similar to Armand Domilowski, who I have on several times. I had him on with Sticks. I don't know if you know Armand, but I think that you guys align on a lot of different things. But out of curiosity, would you say that your audience believes that culture doesn't matter? That it doesn't matter like how a person was brought up, that they don't believe that some people, just like by the way that they were raised, would be a lot more...
I believe culture matters. I believe that the ways that often people think culture matter maybe doesn't, because a lot of people will say like certain aspects of specific culture is better than this neighbor's, and a lot of it is pretty nationalistic in nature. But I think that there are certain trends that cultures can have or cannot have that can be helpful or less helpful to creating societies that I think are more flourishing. For example, I think that societies that allow women to work generally are more successful. One of the reasons why Jews were successful in the ancient world, I don't want to say ancient world, like the last 1,000 years, was because in a lot of communities where women were kind of restricted from working, the man and the wife in the relationship would traditionally work, allowing them to bring in more income and work harder. Whether they were doing like managing leases for the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth or doing whatever.
Yeah.
So those are type of like cultural things that can be picked up that could be more beneficial. That I believe in. But this idea like any people are inherently this or that, or because I believe most claims of Russophobia are usually nonsense, at least how they're thrown by the Russian government, because they're the one that claims it the most. And when they claim it, it's usually just critiques of foreign policy. But there is legitimate Russophobia, and I've seen it. I know it's real.
There
and I
are
don't
also
believe in anything
inbred
like,
Russians as well. You know what I mean? Like there are people who, I know that's not a very, nice term
there's
to
also
use.
inbred Americans. You know?
No, there absolutely are. But as far as what we're talking about, how people end up acting and how people, go about society, America still has a much higher level of civilization than Russia does, and that a lot of the places in the third world do. And my concern is that a lot of people who have good intentions, like they may take a look at other countries and feel bad for them, or have some messiah complex where you think like, oh, I have all these wonderful things and they don't, like maybe I should.
Don't put me in the position of having to be like, let me tell you all the great things about Russia, okay? Don't put me in this. I believe that there are certain, this is why we have specializations, and this is why, I don't want to be a free market show, but this is why that certain countries are better making certain products and other countries are better making other products. A lot of it has to do with local resources, specialization, but that can't come from culture, depending on like what they think if education is valuable, number one, and what type of education is valuable. Where do you specialize in? I mean, people talk about like, Asian parents and doctors and stuff like that.
Yeah,
and
tiger
encouraging
moms.
their kids, tiger moms and stuff like that. But there is a societal expectations that do pass down culturally and do impact like the pathways that people take. But I also am not going to be like, this is the supreme culture and this is a better culture. There's things that America does better. And I've gone through a few countries now and I can be like, I prefer how we are with the Second Amendment, honestly. I prefer how the United States is when it comes to freedom of expression. I prefer how, honestly, I think I might prefer how America is when it comes to drinking. I think 21 might actually be the way to go. After going to a few European countries and see these plastered 16-year-olds. Oh my God. I couldn't imagine what I would be doing if I was 16 and oh my goodness. No. So there's certain things but I've also found the opposite when it comes to certain infrastructure problems or how metro systems are run or for example, free at the point of service things that I think would be better served in the United States, not better served, but would be good in the United States that we haven't adopted. But I've mostly traveled in Europe, so I can't speak to, I don't know, like Paraguay.
Yeah.
But so it's hard for me to claim like civilizational superior. I could say these are things we've done better and these are things they've done better. And I'd like to borrow from other countries. I'm just not like a raging nationalist.
No, that's fair enough. I would again say that there seems to be people who don't listen to, and I'm not just talking about Russians here, because again, like within Russians, you get obviously genius, Russian authors and poets and all that kind of stuff, obviously. Come on. But if we're talking about people who have more of this living in the moment type of thing going on, I know I keep harping on it, but that's just because I think that there are a lot of people who are within more of a quote-unquote neoliberal mindset, like the neoconservatives like Paul Wolfowitz, for instance. He has a similar mindset again when it comes to the Iraqis, where they wouldn't take a look at those living in the moment problems at all, and they would say like, oh, well, why can't they have what we have? And that, I think, may also stem from Protestantism, may stem from this progressive idea that, like, it is up to us
which
to
is the
have
correct
everybody.
God, by the way.
Oh, there we go. But
you do agree, right? Like, you Protestant or of hell, like that's.
yeah, I mean, it's kind of ironic. The Protestants, they have this whole work ethic, yet they're also supposed to believe in, God already decided who's going up and who's going down. But that's a whole other can of worms. But anyway, I think this is a good time to end the stream over here. But the last thing I just want to say is that I do like the attempts at having some kind of an orderly society here and having people be better educated and all this kind of stuff that people who are from more of the liberal side want to encourage. At the same time, how it actually ends up being managed in the ground. There's people, I walk around Manhattan who are staying at this migrant hotel. I just take a look at how they are, how they move, how immediately you see that they are like, it's like an alien people, completely alien. Yet you could have somebody who grew up in the same place, who wanted to make something of himself.
Maybe I'm also very idealistic, but I do believe after going to other countries too and seeing how how ethnic enclaves operate sometimes in other countries, that there is something about America. There is, I'm not like an American exceptionalist, but there is something about the way that we take people talk about like the melting pot, but I almost feel like it's more like a cheese grater. We like we grade you down into like little bits. Okay, now this is what you used to be. Now you make burritos. Congratulations that you're called. And while people consider it consumerism, people don't like it necessarily. I prefer a consumerist harmony over general division based upon ethnicity, language, culture, religion in the United States.
I see your point, but in the very beginning of the migration, if we're talking about like the Italians and the Jews and even the Irish before them, they had this certain noblesse oblige type of thing that they were aiming for when they were looking at how the WASPs were living. There was a certain standard that they wanted to meet. I'm sorry, I don't think at all that is being in any way even softly enforced within our current education system. I see a lot more cultural relativism. I see things like, our former mayor in New York, de Blasio, wanting to lower the testing standards, so that the Asians and the whites don't get ahead of the people of color and so on and so forth. So that's,
honestly, we have so many of the world's top universities in the United States. We produce so many of the world's top entrepreneurs, scientists, people who are researching at top of the field. There has to be something to our education system that isn't just all gay, woke, Antifa.
No, but that's the big Elysium class divide over there, man. Like what you're talking about is a perfect example of California, where you have all these big businesses, all these tech companies, and they are like the Elysium people, and then you have all the people that are, below, that the people who are in Elysium don't really give a shit about improving, not even, their lives as far as, monetary things, but improving the way that the kids and the grandkids of those people end up seeing the world, from like inside. So to me, that's the most important thing to keep like this whole civilization going is what is it that is going on inside as opposed to, anything else, which is like way
I agree
less
that
important.
education and like giving people like when I hear people say I'm not going to vote for, now this is just something I've heard on the left, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So you'll see the problem with me. I'm not going to vote for Kamala because Biden was the one that overturned. They didn't stop Roe versus Wade from being. They didn't save it. They couldn't have. They didn't have the power. It's the Supreme Court. It's out of their power. It's just it's a separation. Like if you don't understand that and then you vote on that type of incorrect information, then that is just, it's like a defective computer during a calculation. And maybe one or two or three like bad computers, that gets kind of snuffed out by all the better calculations that direct you in a certain way. But the worse it gets, the worse it's going to be. Now, a lot of this will depend on voter turnout. Because if people don't know anything, but they don't turn out, then in a way, the ones that turn out because they care and they study end up kind of guiding the country the right way, and people not being interested and therefore not voting. On one hand, that means that they could be helping the country more by focusing on things that they should be. But on the other hand, if they're not going to it, rather than not vote. Because then they're a bad computer. Do you get what I'm saying?
I think I get what you're saying. I mean, as far as the bad computers that are out there, for most of our history, most of the computers that were out there were very focused on making sure that they pay attention to the weather patterns so that their crops don't get destroyed, right? Like that's what most people...
Very individual focused, and they can see only around themselves.
Yeah.
Which really scares me with a lot of this misinformation that's being spread on social media and disinformation and stuff that can make the calculations worse. Because none of these people, the person I just talked to today, he's not going to give. He said it was stupid to even go over here and like look around. So he's made up his mind off of what he's seen online about this money laundering that he didn't have anything for. But he's very sure of it, and he's seen enough of it, and he believes in it. And so maybe you just have to catch them earlier and give people the better information. And I think that comes with like better media consumption training when you're younger, which I think has to be mandatory to live in the United States, is understand how to consume media and understand.
Yeah, but who watches the Watchmen? Who are the people that do that? Because again, that's my whole problem with education to begin with. We have these.
But you have to have education.
No, sure. Well,
Lev, are you a? Oh my gosh, I didn't know. You
I can no. Well, I can imagine.
Lev.
I can imagine the scenario where most of the education is just done through the internet. And no, I'm not. Look, our education is screwed up. It's not perfect, but obviously, maybe it's better than nothing, or maybe it's not. Maybe if we ban all the public schools, maybe that's not going to be such a bad society anyway. I don't know. I don't know what to answer you there. All that I do know is that most of the people who I've encountered who are like public school teachers, they're not impressive people. They don't really have anything of wisdom to bestow upon a lot of these kids. They're just like parrots. They're reciting whatever it was that was given to them, and the other people, like a Hall of Mirrors type scenario, keep doing that. And I think what we do need is a responsible group of elites who are not dictators. They're not dictators, but they are people who set a certain cultural tone that other people end up following so that certain old school values can be resurrected. I don't think that's too much to ask.
I wish if a teacher's a history teacher, they should be focusing on teaching history. If a teacher is a science teacher, they focus on teaching science. They shouldn't be all of a sudden the English teacher that's sitting in because 6 months into the school year, they decided to dip out. And now we don't have an English teacher. The son of the math teacher is managing math and reading. And then they become just reciting stuff because that's all they have the time for. They wouldn't be able to have any life if they didn't. To some extent, like you were saying you don't like teachers, but I think a lot of the things that you're talking about isn't necessarily even like a teacher problem. It's an infrastructure problem. If you put a teacher in there and you say you're going to be teaching history, and then all of a sudden you're not just teaching history, you're also having to watch over the kids during, lunch breaks. You're also maybe having to watch over, gym time. You're also going to have to watch over
notice what you're saying.
time.
You notice what you're saying. You're saying watch over, as in you're making sure that these kids don't do some horrible thing. While that's the core problem. That's the problem that ends up getting nipped in the bud with the family structure.
Let them hit each other with the bats over at playground time.
Yes, exactly.
Battle of the fittest.
Yeah, no. Actually, that's not what I'm saying at all. That would be the scenario without the teacher. What I'm saying is that that's the root problem, which I think a lot of people who are, on the Democrat side end up ignoring at their own peril, which is that unless the family is stable, unless the family, like, good example, like Jewish families, a lot of the anti-Semites, they hate on the Jews. And what
they do that.
Yeah, they do that. They have a tendency to do that. But what they I think would benefit from would be to duplicate the kind of family structure within the Jewish household where there's a lot of focus on education. There's a lot of focus on, paying attention to the individual needs of the kids, a lot of like a lack of child beating. There's a lot of care.
If you're asking if we should have more martial punishment for children, is that the question?
No, you don't get it.
You're saying that we coddle the children too much.
No, that's not what I'm saying at all. You're misinterpreting it.
We should grab the children, put them in the field, and say, "Run!" One rifle, and the one that survives is the strongest of the flock, and they shall lead us to a new.
No. What I'm saying is the opposite. What I'm saying is that I think there's too much. Okay, let me put it like this. In certain places like California, you have kids who can't even have basic literacy. They don't know how to read. I don't think that that's a problem with the teachers. I think some of it. But I think that most
is structural.
But you'd never have any of these structural problems if there was the same level of care that was paid to a lot of these kids in those families as is with Asian families and Jewish families. You know what I mean? Like, that's something that we should encourage a lot more. There was even this interview I remember Adam Carolla had with Gavin Newsom, where Adam brought this up and said, well, what's wrong with, like, the black kids and the Latino kids, and Gavin Newsom said, oh, nothing, they're, everybody's so smart and they're so wonderful. It's like, you guys are kicking the can down the road, and again, my opinion is that you shouldn't give up. You should actually address this thing, but nobody's willing to address it because by addressing it, you're saying that some cultures are better than others.
You don't need to say like a culture is better. If there's one culture that has a problem with one specific, like certain like religious practices that are practiced in some places, can lead to due to the places that they are either being contaminated or other things, like can lead to like higher rates of this, and that is a problem it is a problem that someone who will not have that religious tradition will not engage with. And I can see that basic problem and having to address that.
But why does the word better?
Let me. A lot of it's going to be byproducts of an environment. If you're in the shit in the like a bad neighborhood and it's where there's gangs, crime, violence, drugs, this is the place you grow up. The music is going to talk about the environment you grew up in. The language is going to be accustomed to that environment. Everything's going to be accustomed to that environment. That's what's going to be born around you. And so I don't know if this is what you say. I don't think this is what you're saying. When I hear people say things like the music, like the gangster rap, is turning them gangsta. If they just didn't have so much gangster rap. The gangsters is what made the gangster rap. If there were no gangsters, then there'd be no gangster rap. If there were no sunflowers, then there would be no songs about sunflowers.
I can give you a great example.
What I'm interested is, what is this policy, or what would this approach be that isn't like no more gangster rap? I don't think that's going to fix it.
I can tell you right now, and your audience is probably going to hate this. I don't give a shit anymore. Here we go. So there's a gentleman who I know. I've known him for many years now. He grew up. His dad was somewhere like American, and his mom was from Mexico. And he grew up in an environment where he was around a lot of these gangstas, as you would call it, and he felt a lot of animosity towards people who were not within that group. Like the people who he saw around him who were, very, wealthy and, had it better than he did. He just wanted to do horrible things to those people. And that kind of animosity ends up building up. What ended up curing that mindset and actually gave him a lot of self-confidence was joining the military. After he joined the military, he found something bigger to live for. And he found like people around him who came from, different walks of life, and he got to understand people more, and he got better discipline and all of this stuff. So his idea, like I talked to him about this, would be to take a lot of these kids who are like 3 to 4 years old, just take them out of the ghetto, take them out of, the crack dens, get them away from these parents who are completely irresponsible, who are going to reduce their lives to nothing more than just like this horrible gangsta culture, and bring them into somewhere like the military, somewhere where they would have people who they grew up with who are, great role models, that they could look up to, and they get more discipline down the road and stuff like that. That's not the worst idea in the world.
The thing is, though, we can't just make everybody in a community, and this isn't just like, and we're talking about gangsters, but it's not just gangsters, it's hillbillies. I come from West Virginia, people, and let me tell you, there's moonshining people. It's people who have a lot of problem with the law, and might not have the longest lifespans either because of some health decisions and risk decisions that they make. And so it's not. I'm trying to think of the best way to put this. For me, I think the military, while it's a solution for somebody to get out of poverty in West Virginia, my grandfather was castrating pigs before as a kid on a farm in the middle of nowhere. It doesn't matter which state, it's the middle of nowhere. And then when Vietnam came around, he volunteered as an underage soldier, went and served in order to get out of there. And it did give him structure. He's still very proud of being a Marine. But I don't think that's a solution for everybody. If everybody became a Marine and a soldier, while that might solve our recruiting problem, we would have way too many soldiers. And I also think it would be unbelievably expensive. Well, no, what I'm saying, my point is just going to be, you have to help people where they are. We're talking about stuff like getting out of that environment. People talk about this all the time. Like, we were in the hood, then we got out. We were in the middle of nowhere, this impoverished place, then we got out. But then there's still people there. There is still a place there. There's still going to be the hood. There's still going to be West Virginia, even if they get out and get somewhere else. You have to help them where they are. You have to confront these societal issues or these limitations on local education, on local entrepreneurship where they are. You can't just hope to get out. If you hope to get out, then you're just abandoning the community.
I'm not going to say no to that, but again, it all has to go back to, can you, in the span of many, many generations, figure out a way to get these family structures in order, to get families to stick together with each other, to get some kind of a cohesiveness, because that's really what we're after, isn't it? Like, once you solve that problem, everything else ends up solving itself, I think.
You mean by having a good family structure?
Absolutely, 100%.
I think family structure is one factor, yes.
Big factor.
But I feel like it is a big factor. But I feel like sometimes people treat it like if somebody has a Lamborghini, the odds that they are a wealthy individual is probably higher than if they don't, right? But the fact that they have a Lamborghini is not necessarily the reason that they're wealthy. And while it is true that on average that married couples are more likely to succeed, and I do think that having two incomes, like we were talking about earlier, with the Jews of the Jews of Poland, Lithuania, when they were working with the government in leases, having those two people work is going to be a lot more beneficial. I agree there. Sorry, I'm getting a little distracted. My chat is very interesting. Sorry, give me a moment.
Everybody, by the way, subscribe to BreakTheRules.tv. I don't care if you're a commie or neoliberal or whatever. Look, so many of the people who I have on here who are from the further right, I completely disagree with them, yet I really appreciate the fact that we're all willing to come on and have these kind of conversations. So if you want to have similar conversations like this, breaktherules.tv, subscribe right now, patreon.com/breaktherules. I'm going to be having these New York City events, like I said before, and my condo, rooftop party, all that good stuff. So go there right now. But anyway, Dylan, you were saying.
For me, it's like if you have to create an environment that is sustainable to life, it's sustainable to economic prosperity, sustainable to an environment where they could succeed, before even talking about the mentality that would be necessary for the whole community to succeed. On an individual level, people can leave. People can leave the community, go somewhere else, find more fertile ground, and succeed. But if you're trying to grow a tree in a place where all the dirt is dead, it's no black soil, it's all dried up, no matter how much effort you put into, you've got to change the foundation. And so while it is true that like getting two people in that environment to get married, having two incomes, that's going to help them, I don't think that necessarily is what is alone necessary for a recipe for success. Individual responsibility, of course, is important, but if you don't make a playing ground where people can't succeed, that they're not going to. The countries that invest more into the soccer program are going to have more successful soccer players probably than the ones where everybody has to like put up like tree branches in order to have a goal.
No, I could definitely see there being a need for that. I just may be a little bit more black-pilled about whether the people who are currently, are social workers or educators or whatever you want to say, whether they're competent enough. I mean, I just don't see the incentive for them to be competent if their very existence relies on the problem never being solved.
I mean, then that you could say that about a lot of like police officers as well.
Of course,
you could say that.
Of course.
Could you even say that about firefighters? Like, why solve climate change? I mean, I don't know. Maybe we need our fires. Okay, they're going to start arson firefighter.
Yeah.
The firefighter union is going to start burning down forests.
Think of how many organizations there are, as far as, something like, and again, I'm not an expert on climate change, but I am seeing a lot of money being made from organizations that are all about that. So again, I think that
firefighter arsonists, you heard it here first.
Yes. I think that more people just want to make money, want to make a good living, and are willing to let things go to shit if it means that people are always going to be, especially like if they're part of the government, looking at them as, well, we can't get rid of you guys. Obviously, we need you to fix this problem, so we're going to give you even more money. You see what I mean? Like, it keeps becoming this horrible cycle. And so maybe it is going to have to get worse, way, way, way worse before it gets better. And then as far as the people that are going to, and this is like an ultra black-pilled version, I'm not saying this is what's going to happen, but ultimately, if things do go to shit, people are going to suffer, there's going to be deaths, things are going to be bad, but then the people that make it out of there, they'll figure out a way to do so, and then we're going to overcome whatever hurdle we're in right now.
So I think I want to wrap stuff up. I have one question for you, though.
Sure.
Now, with today's guest we had, obviously, I don't think I was going to change his mind much on anything, because he said, like, foreign agents can buy American content creators completely covertly, and it's not really a problem for him that much. And I was like, we have such a difference in values that it's kind of hard to find any alignment. But when we're talking about like that New York Times story, or we're talking about the money laundering, for example, I've heard that a million times. I've looked into it quite a lot, and I understand, I think, Ukrainian corruption more than the average bear. And the corruption stories are real. You can talk about the military jacket stuff, but the stuff he just brought up was he couldn't back it up. But I don't know if he really doesn't believe it or not, because from the way he reacted, he could legitimately believe it, but be refusing to reassess his views, or he just doesn't want to give something up like that in the moment. I don't know either way. But my question to you is, when you get into a moment like that, what do you think that the best thing is to do to try to get somebody to be like, or like shake somebody a little bit? Like, you just saw this on Twitter 20 times. It doesn't mean it's real.
You call them back. That's what you do.
Gotcha. Okay. Understood.
No, that really is the only way, unfortunately, in the world we're in, right? People love being edgy. People love, battling each other and thinking of the other person as being lower their dirt if all of a sudden their ideas don't align. And it's a damn shame, isn't it? Because it's just ideas. Why do we have to feel so negatively about each other just because you happen to think that society should be oriented this way as opposed to that way. I don't know. I mean, like we said before, it's a human thing. It's a tribal thing, right?
Yep. Well, thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it, buddy.
I appreciate it, you. I would love to have you back on with people who are not going to, test the algorithm, as it were. So there we are. And guys, please be sure to subscribe to Dylan Burns TV. And you're going to have the Hippy Dippy show as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
September 13th, we're actually going to have NATO and continued support for NATO as one of the topics, as well as the debate, the presidential debate that's 2 days before it, because we're going to be having a hippy dippy right after the presidential debate. So we're going to have guests on for that as well. It's going to be an interesting lineup. We haven't announced it yet, but we're going to announce it in the near future. And it's going to be a great show, 6:30 EST on Dylan Burns Live, my second channel. Dylan Burns TV is for my on-the-ground war journalism.
Nice. And guys, be sure to subscribe to BreakTheRules.tv. Add a like, subscribe, click the bell. The bell is extremely important. Dylan, thank you very much for coming in. And thank you to everybody who is watching this. And I will see you guys later. Take care. Good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.